do, I'll tell how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. Today, we talk to IFPTE about what a pro-worker H-1B program would look like. Also, there are opportunities for pro-worker advances in the Alabama legislative session, and we'll take your calls, all that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, like I said, we will probably have time for some calls. The line is open. You can give us a call at 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. You can also leave us a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond on the next show if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week. You can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm. But we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We've got a bunch of really cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store, including our logo dad cap. Pre-orders are still open for the unionized t-shirts. Those should be in sometime in February. And our new union-made matchbooks are in. I don't know if you can see that, but it's really freaking cool. Look at that. It says "Fire Your Boss." It's got a nice union bug on the bottom of it and our logo on the back. Really cool. Check it out. tvlr.fm/store. Also, finally, if you're a member of a union, then think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Hey, y'all, let me add a disclaimer. Hold on a second. Sorry. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. And we want to welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, and now WGOW, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, so if you're into this sort of thing and you want to see other shows like it, you can check that out, and we encourage that. As most of you know, we are not media professionals. We're just some diehard union brothers who want to amplify the voices of the working class here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks to everybody hanging out with us in the chat. We already have over 20 people listening. We've got Matt and Amanda in the chat. Amanda says good morning from New Jersey. Matt says nice lid. Thank you. It is Druid City Brewing from Tuscaloosa. They're a brewery in Tuscaloosa. Very good. Bo is a friend of the show. I think we can go so far as to say Bo is the owner of Druid City Brewing. He donated a lot of money during our or he donated a lot of time and resources during our fundraising thing for the striking coal miners over there. So, big fan of Druid City Brewing, and they also have some good alcohol. Corky Geek Girl says, good morning from Toronto. It's supposed to snow today. Ah, very cool. Snowed here last week. We got like, what was it? 5, 6, 7 inches of snow. It was crazy. We never get that much snow here. Corky Geek Girl says, I'm really looking forward to the interview today. Saying, I hate Crowder. And yes, if you're just listening to us on the radio, then you definitely want to find us online at the Valley Labor Report, where you can continue listening to the show after we go off of the air, where we will be playing an interview with Matt Bruenig, a labor lawyer, where he talks about how he completely destroyed right-wing commentator Steven Crowder in court and won a significant amount of money for a former employee of Steven Crowder. So very, very cool. Jared says, who's coming on from IFPTE? Secretary Treasurer Henson? Yes, indeed. She'll be on momentarily, along with Faraz Khan, the legislative director. Not Lost 2 says, hot damn, good morning from Manitoba. Another Canadian. Wow. That's crazy. That's 2 Canadians in the chat. Penelope says, good morning. Good morning, Penelope. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into Last Week in Southern Labor. Last Week in Southern Labor is a segment that we do every week where we take a look at what U.S. workers, what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to. Here's what they were up to from January 10th to the 17th. In new union campaigns, 11 workers at McAllister Oil in Memphis, Tennessee, filed for a union election with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 667. 19 workers at Mulzer Crushed Stone Incorporated in Owensboro, Kentucky, filed for a union election with the Central Midwest Regional Council of the Carpenters Union. 8 workers at Dominion Energy South Carolina in North Charleston, South Carolina, filed for a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 398. 23 workers employed by Nexstar Media Incorporated, doing business as News Nation at its facility in Washington, D.C., filed for a union election with Local 12,000 of the IBEW. 6 workers at Lakeshore Recycling Systems, LLC, in Mayflower, Arkansas, filed for a union election with the Teamsters Local 373. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, there is a raid happening between 2 unions to represent 265 security guards at MaxCent on the government contract for the Department of Protective Services. Workers likely pushed by their employer filed a petition to decertify the building materials, excavating, heavy haulers, drivers, and warehousemen and helpers, Local 541. My guess is they're a Teamsters affiliate, but I don't know, which represents 10 workers at Martin Marietta Materials in Greenwood, Missouri. At the same employer, there's a petition to decertify the Heavy Construction Laborers Local 663, which represents 9 other workers there. In election results, 215 workers at the U.S. Government Publishing Office in Washington, D.C. voted in favor of unionization with the Teamsters. Workers voted 16-3 to certify the ICWUC Local 191T of the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, as the union at Gaylord Chemical in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. 12, Roll Tide. Yeah, Roll Tide. 12 workers at Texas Public Radio voted 7-5 to unionize with SAG-AFTRA. 19 workers at Intelitex in Augusta, Georgia, voted 15-4 to unionize with the Industrial Division of the Communication Workers of America, IUECWA. IUECWA picked up another win in Augusta, Georgia, with 6 workers at ASJ Solutions, another IT company, voting 4-0 in favor of unionization. Workers tied 2-2 at Chase Carson and White LLC in Research Park, Research Park Triangle, North Carolina, meaning that the Industrial, Technical, and Professional Employees Union Local 4873, an OPEIU affiliate, will not be certified as the union there. Metropolitan District 1199 DC, National Union of Hospital and Healthcare Employees, at an AFSCME affiliate, withdrew their petition to represent 30 workers at Unity Healthcare in Washington, D.C. And workers at Republic Services in Calhoun, Georgia, voted unanimously against decertification of the union Teamsters Local 728. So the union will continue to represent the 39 workers there. The decertification appears driven by the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and the employer was represented by notorious law firm Littler Mendelson. That's amazing that they got 0 votes to decertify the union. because
Right.
you
Yeah,
have to
that
get
stood
you
out.
have to get signatures on the petition to even have an election. That's crazy. Looks like Teamsters Local 618 withdrew their petition to represent 6 workers at United Pacific in Melville, Missouri. In strikes and bargaining updates, 430 Cisco Teamsters out of Local 988 in Houston, Texas, went on strike Friday, as far as I can tell. They said that they would strike Friday if they didn't get a deal, and I have not seen word of a deal, but I also haven't seen confirmation of a strike, so not totally sure what's going on there. Cisco has refused to give the workers a fair contract. The Teamsters say a strike at Cisco in Houston would have widespread effects, disrupting deliveries to schools, universities, hospitals, and local businesses. Allegiant Air pilots unionized with Teamsters Local 2118 withstood below freezing temperatures for a practice picket outside of Asheville Regional Airport. As negotiations stall with the carrier, the Teamsters represent 1,300 of these pilots who voted 97.4% to authorize a strike if the carrier fails to give them a good offer. The Teamsters say Allegiant pilots make 40% less than the industry standard. Workers trying to organize a union at Amazon's KCVG Air Hub in Kentucky are pushing for the company to excuse all missed time for the recent snowstorm, even because apparently employees had to use personal time even when it was unsafe to drive to work. Workers at Alamo Draft House, unionized in Austin, Texas, with Draft House United, an IWW affiliate, say that the company has, without warning, fired 25% of all workers nationwide. This comes after the company was sold to private equity and then to Sony for some reason. National Nurses United, NNU, held a nationwide day of action, including at several locations across the South, including in Alabama, in support of safe staffing levels and patient protections against AI. The union is doing this as more than 100,000 NNU members are entering contract negotiations with their employers this year. 4,200 CSX railroad workers, represented by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division, BMWED, of the Teamsters Rail Conference, ratified a new contract last week. The new 5-year agreement secures raises of 18.77% compounded over the life of the contract, a reduction in the time needed to accumulate vacation, improved health and welfare benefits, and improvements to local work rules, according to the union. 40 home care therapists and assistants employed by Alternate Health Solutions Network, AHSN, members of CWA Local 2252, held a one-day unfair labor practice strike last week. The workers have been negotiating for 4 months, and the company's last offer was 57 cents, a 0.5 to 1% wage raise for the workers, while prices have gone up 25%. Approximately 200 stage workers at the Altria Theater, Dominion Energy Center, and John Paul Jones Arena in Virginia are preparing for a potential strike as negotiations with management company ASM Global have failed to result in a new contract. Represented by the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees, IATSE Local 87, crew members have been engaged in over 6 months of contract negotiations seeking fair wages and benefits. Currently, the base rate for a stagehand at ASM's Richmond venues remains below $20 an hour, which is crazy. IATSE stagehands in Huntsville make more than that, placing the Richmond area among the lowest paying markets in the region for stagehands. This has led to difficulty attracting and retaining skilled workers in the industry, obviously. Worse, over the past 6 years, workers have received minimal 1% annual raises. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, is supporting a trio of bills that would provide a 4.3% raise to federal workers, fix problems with COLA, and prevent Schedule F. The Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU, Local 1546, is in contract negotiations with the Baton Rouge, Louisiana's Capital Area Transit System, with the union accusing management of bad faith bargaining. In political and legislative updates, the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, issued a hopeful statement as news of a ceasefire in Gaza was announced, saying SEIU's 2 million members stand united in the hope that today's long overdue ceasefire agreement finally returns hostages to their loved ones and begins to put us on a path towards finding a long-term solution that will bring safety, peace, democracy, and justice to all in the region. The details of this ceasefire agreement will be critical given the horrific violence in Gaza. When Trump's ostensibly pro-labor Department of Labor pick was announced, there was reporting at the time that Trump's team was going around assuaging business fears by saying that the business community will like the deputy secretary. Well, that pick has been announced. Keith Sonderling. Lauren Gurley with the Washington Post reports that business groups are, quote, thrilled with the pick, and that he has been a proponent of a, quote, deregulatory DOL agenda. Even the ostensibly pro-labor Lori Chavez de Remer, the secretary pick, whose appointment was pushed by Teamsters president Sean O'Brien, met last week with McDonald's and Wendy's representatives, among others, where she heard their, quote, concerns over the joint employer portions of the bill, of the PRO Act, which, it's important to remember, are the same provisions of the bill that she herself voiced, quote, concern over, and the same provisions of the bill that kept her from co-sponsoring the PRO Act for a long time, and yet is the provision of the bill that is probably the most important for the Teamsters as they escalate their campaign to organize Amazon. Chavez de Remer also voted to nullify joint employer standards specifically. Bernie Sanders gave an excellent speech on the floor of the Senate last week, excoriating employers like Elon Musk who exploit immigrant guest workers and U.S.-born workers. Recommend listening to that if you have the time. The city of Birmingham, Alabama, became the first in the state to pass a local hire ordinance, ensuring federal infrastructure investments benefit local workers directly. Jobs to Move America, a major backer of the ordinance, says this means that 30% of labor hours on city-funded construction projects will go to Birmingham area workers. 15% of hours will be completed by apprentices in certified training programs, and it prioritizes equity by removing barriers for underserved communities. The Federal Trade Commission, chaired by Lena Khan, is going out with a flurry of activity in her final week. They issued a report detailing how dead CEO Brian Thompson's company United Healthcare overcharged some cancer patients for drugs by more than 1,000%. The company's pharmacy benefit manager, along with its peers, pocketed an extra $73 billion thanks to price gouging, according to the FTC report. They also filed a lawsuit against John Deere, saying the company is generating $6 billion by prohibiting farmers from repairing their own equipment. The AFL-CIO will not be making an endorsement in the DNC race, while still saying they are, quote, laser focused on working closely with DNC leaders to lift up working people across geography and ideology so that together we can fight off anti-union attacks from billionaire bosses and advance an agenda that will grow the labor movement. The RWDSU and UFCW, however, are endorsing Ken Martin from Minnesota, and AFSCME, AFT, NEA, and SEIU all endorsed Ben Wickler of Wisconsin. In internal union affairs, the United Auto Workers, UAW, held their national Ford and sub-council meetings in Chattanooga last week to strategize for the upcoming year, and Railroad Workers United is hiring a membership organizer. If we missed anything, let us know at tvlr.fm/contact, and we can include it in next week's Roundup. We're going to head to a break, and we will be right back with the International Secretary-Treasurer of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers and their legislative director to talk about the H-1B program. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at AFGE.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you're listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. If you have anything to add, you can give us a call, 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Dr. Mad in the chat says, good morning, everyone. My union now has an action coming up this Tuesday. We've heard some crazy news this Thursday, and now we're doing something about it. Exciting news, chatter. Appreciate you letting us know about that. Feel free to leave us a voicemail about the action. Would be interested in learning more. Ethan says, what's up, beautiful people? Dr. Mad says, also, NNU in my town were active Thursday. Their contract has been in effect for 6 months, and it's already not being followed. Wow. That is terrible. Mel and Joe on Facebook say good morning. Good morning, Mel and Joe. Appreciate y'all tuning in as always. So there has been a big controversy, particularly on the right. Of course, there have been people intervening on the left and from the labor movement about this controversy. That's about the H-1B visa program. Bernie Sanders, like I said during last week in Southern Labor, gave a big speech about the issue on the floor of the Senate last week. I clipped about a minute of the speech that I thought was really good. Let's play this before we go to our guests, just to kind of set the stage.
There are two sides of the same coin. Madam President, if there is truly a major shortage of skilled tech workers in this country, as Elon Musk and others have argued, why did Tesla lay off over 7,500 American workers last year, including many software developers and engineers at its factory in Austin, Texas, while at the same time applying to hire thousands of H-1B guest workers? If these jobs are only going to the best and the brightest, why has Tesla employed H-1B guest workers as associate accountants for as little as $58,000 a year, associate mechanical engineers for as little as $70,000 a year, and associate material planners for as little as $80,000 a year? Now, Madam President, I will admit I am not a rocket scientist, but to my mind, those occupations don't sound like highly specialized jobs that are primarily for the top 0.1%, as Mr. Musk claimed last month.
That's a excellent. Again, it's like a 20-minute speech. Really recommend folks checking it out. But that's a really good kind of snippet as a foundation for the conversation. Gay Henson is the International Secretary-Treasurer of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, IFPTE. Faraz Khan is IFPTE's Legislative Director. Faraz, Gay, welcome to the program. And Gay, welcome back to the program. Appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I reached out because I saw Secretary Treasurer Henson's comments to Politico about this program, and y'all represent a lot of people in these same kinds of fields. We can talk later. I'm interested in specifically if you have, members that you represent that are on these programs, or if you have members that have been affected by these programs. There are a lot of conversations happening about it, and some of it, some of the criticisms that are happening that are being levied against the H-1B visa system, we would not be exactly aligned, because there have been some kind of anti-immigrant stuff being said about these workers, and that's not kind of the place that we are coming from as unionists. We are coming from a place where we want something that will be better both for these guest workers where they're needed and for the people that are going to be working alongside them that have been born in the U.S. And I wanted to start by talking about a fight that happened with your union during the last Trump administration. It's not exactly the same. The way that I remember it, and Gay, I'll let you correct anything that I get wrong, but the way that I remember it is that the TVA was interested in outsourcing some 80 IT jobs. And of course, again, it's not exactly an H-1B fight. I don't think it was, but there are similar dynamics there. And so it's interesting kind of seeing how Trump in the last administration actually supported what the union was asking for and protected these jobs for American workers instead of outsourcing them. And the work that y'all did to make that happen was really great. And so if you could, Secretary Treasurer Henson, could you remind people about this fight that your union had at the TVA, and how y'all were able to successfully set here in Huntsville and Chattanooga?
Yeah, sure. At least it was 220 jobs actually. It was a lot of jobs.
So maybe it was 80 jobs in Huntsville is why I'm thinking 80.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was. It was there was a big pocket of workers there in Huntsville, but altogether it was like 220, 230 jobs that TVA wanted to offshore them to overseas, and they wanted our workers to train them. So we were like, no, that's not right. We raised a bunch of fuss about it, and eventually we did meet with Trump, who was on our side about it. Said that American jobs need to belong to American workers, and we let him know. And we've always said, kind of what you were talking about a minute ago, Jacob. We've always said that we're not anti foreign worker. We're pro immigrant and house workers here in the United States, but we feel like, there's some reform that needs to happen. But back to the TVA, they saw the light on this with some help from President Donald Trump, and I don't think that would happen again there. And I mean, I actually think that Donald Trump would weigh in the same way about it at TVA. That's why I think that some of this that I'm hearing in the news about these, billionaire and tech worker folks trying to come in and expand the amount of foreign workers we bring in, immigrant workers that we bring in, and replace American workers. But what we're thinking is that TVA is, like I said, seeing the light on that. I don't think that they know we'd still be here ready to scream and holler about it if they decide to do that again. So I think we're in good shape there, but we do think there's room for lots of reform in this area.
Right, right, and it's an interesting dynamic there that I do think, particularly with the federal government, that these folks would have a much harder time implementing these kind of exploitative programs for federal jobs. But it's an interesting dynamic there that Trump has actually in the past, at least in this instance, been supportive of the union demands in these kinds of instances. While it seems like, at least for now, on the H-1B question, these billionaire, tech oligarchs like the Elon Musk and the Vivek Ramaswamis seem to have his ear on this question of the H-1B program. And so, as IFPTE sees it, and maybe Faraz Khan, you would be you'd be good to answer this. What are some of the problems that your union sees with the program as it currently exists?
Yeah, so that is really the right place to start when thinking about what this program is and what this program isn't. The intention here with this, and really to take a step back, the problem with the H-1B program is deeply structural. It is really the design of the program. So the intent of the H-1B visa was to allow employers in the U.S. to recruit for hard to fill jobs. Professional occupations where there was no ability to recruit in the U.S. Domestic labor market for those jobs. That's not the way that the program has been designed to work. That's certainly not the way it's worked. And the deep flaws in that design have really sort of allowed corporations, employers, and whole industry groups to basically create really deeply exploitive recruitment models, and even a whole industry is cropped up around the H-1B visa that offshores U.S. jobs, U.S. IT jobs all over the world. So when we're really talking about reforming the H-1B visa and meeting its original purpose, there is a purpose there. It does make sense. But the program itself, this visa program, has never been aligned with the original intent and purpose. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we have policies that are determined sometimes by powerful corporate interests, and this is easily one of those examples, unfortunately. But the real problems that we see with the H-1B visa program, to get back to your question, it's the fact that you have employers able to recruit or petition for H-1B workers that are coming over from other countries without adequately recruiting in the U.S., without adequately determining that there is in fact a need or having that need verified. And then you have a process that brings those workers over here at wages, and there's 4 wage skill levels in the H-1B visa program. So level 1 wages are about 17% of the local prevailing wage, and level 2 wages, I believe, are something around 37%. The vast majority of H-1B workers that are in the U.S. are working at wage 1 or wage 2. It's about 60%. That are at wage 1 and wage 2, or level 1, level 2 wages. So we basically have H-1B workers that are coming here for supposedly hard to fill jobs in the U.S. that are making below prevailing wages. It doesn't really make any sense. If these are hard to fill jobs, wouldn't the labor market be providing higher wages to try to recruit domestically? And wouldn't we want people to sort of have that incentive to want to pursue those careers with wages? So there's like deep design flaws that really overlook how workers would view these jobs. What ends up happening really is the fact that you have a program that undercuts and lowers labor standards, not just wages, but also a deeply fundamental labor standard of labor mobility. Workers that come over on the H-1B visa program have their immigration status tied to their employer. the law right now gives H-1B workers 60 days to find another job if they want to, but they have to find another job at a H-1B employer. It's not a lot of time, and that coercive control, can be just as bad, if not worse, than paying H-1B workers lower wages. I mean, in some instances, you'll have H-1B workers that aren't paid lower wages than their U.S. counterparts, but that coercive control, that captive labor element to the H-1B program really cannot be underscored. And then, Senator Sanders' point is exactly right. The fact that you have H-1B or you have tech workers being laid off has nothing to do with those same employers that are laying off their U.S. workforce. Has nothing to do with the fact that they turn right around and they file petitions to bring H-1B workers into the U.S. And one last thing I'll just say about the flaws, just as an example of the flaw in the design. When employers are petitioning for H-1B workers, there's a capped portion of the program. There's about 130 H-1B visas issued every year. 85,000 of those 130,000 H-1B visas are in the capped portion of the program. The remainder go to nonprofits and academia and universities and government entities. But the 85,000 H-1B visas are allocated by lottery. It is a random lottery. So that design element, it basically creates an incentive for large employers that are willing to spend to flood the petition process, right? They can crowd out employers that may have a legitimate need for the H-1B visa, but may not have as much resources. And then there's also the fact that if you're an employer that's going to underpay your H-1B worker, you have all the more incentive to pay a little more to file a few more petitions for H-1B workers and stand a better chance of having the lottery pick your petition, right? So there's deep flaws here that need to be addressed here, and I think that's really the through line from the beginning of this program to where we are today.
Right. And so is this something that y'all have to deal with in some of the workplaces that you do represent, Gay? I mean, do you have members that are H-1B workers, or do you have people that work alongside H-1B workers? Like, how does that work, and exactly how involved are y'all in, this kind of visa program?
Yeah, we have both those situations, and we are very involved in this visa program. We've been one of the most active unions around. AFL-CIO is all over this, and we're partnering with them to get it right. The main thing that we think is, I'm putting my glasses on so I can see my notes here, but I mean, like the current system, as Faraz says, underpays workers and exploits workers and makes them tied to the company, which we feel like also a safety issue. Like if I work for a place and I'm a H-1B visa worker, I'm going to be a lot less inclined to bring up an issue that I think is important for safety reason. If that means that the company might have to change their processes, cost them more money, then they may say, I don't need Gay working here if she's going to keep bringing up these issues. And then I can't do that if my family's here and I'm here working, and my ability to stay in the United States and work with my family alongside, and a lot of times the wives are working too, or husbands, the spouses are working as well. So it's very messed up in that regard. And this program then encourages offshoring, outsourcing, privatizing of jobs, which is just terrible. But there are some solutions to this. I mean, like we've got to rein it in my opinion. And reining it in defends the rights of workers, and it also lifts the standards for everybody, for both U.S. workers and immigrant workers. But one thing that TVA did once they recognized that this was not a good idea, with some little help, but they did recognize that, and so they decided that workforce development's the answer, and that's what we're doing. We're working with them right now to train for what they need, the SMR programs that they're wanting to look at, and even the large builds of nuclear and all that in our region down there in Tennessee and Alabama. I mean, we can train for what we need, and we can partner together to make that happen. And that's what we're doing. We're pursuing IFPTE and TVA, and as long, and this is being duplicated other places, are on the partnership path about it now, which is much better. So I'll let, if I can, let Faraz weigh in on some of the other things you asked, because we
Yeah,
have a lot of people in this
I
boat.
think yeah, yeah. I think Gay covered a lot of ground there. Really, I think the only thing I'll add is the one impact that the ongoing use of the H-1B visa program, and it's really a cumulative effect across the over 30 years that this visa has been around for, is that it does have an impact on the labor market and job quality in um, the uh, the industries where you see an over reliance of the H-1B visas. Certainly the IT industry in the U.S. And Gay mentioned this offshore outsourcing model. And within the IT industry and within the H-1B visa program, you see this massive reliance on the H-1B visa by these tech companies that are based overseas. Uh, they bring H-1B workers into, and this is one of those things that we were seeing also at TVA. The outsourcing firms at TVA back in 2020, when we started to see H-1B workers being trained by our members there. Our thoughts immediately went to, is this not just outsourcing to non-government companies, and is this something else? Is this also offshoring some of that work? What the offshore outsourcing model really is it's a way for H-1B workers to transfer knowledge and move that overseas, move a lot of the back end work in IT to other countries, other low wage countries. Simply put, if you have two labor standards, you don't have a standard. And it's, we do hear sometimes from our members about their kids wanting to follow in their footsteps in engineering fields or in information technology fields, and having a harder time finding jobs. It creates a softness and a weakness in the labor market, and I think it's advantageous for employers in sort of like the larger picture. So it's yeah, it's there's, and again, every few years it'll come back into the headlines, that American workers, and that means workers that are first and second generation immigrants that are here too. It means, it is the broad swath of workers in the US have issues with the H-1B visa and their experience with it.
And so, Con, what kind of reforms would IFPTE like to see? Are there some specific points of reform that y'all are pushing? I know that when I talked to y'all earlier this week, you mentioned that Bernie Sanders had a couple of amendments that he was trying to push through on the Laken Riley Act to the H-1B visa program. So what amendments were those? To what extent did IFPTE support them? And have they been tacked on to this bill that looks like it's going to pass?
Yeah, so let me start by saying that we've endorsed a bipartisan bill for a long while, as has the AFL-CIO, called the H-1B and L-1 Visa Reform Act. This is sometimes called the Durbin-Grassley bill. It is a bipartisan compromise, so it is not a bill where labor gets everything it wants. But the idea is that if we are able to move something like, I don't know, immigration reform in one of these Congresses, I would, I think there's good reasons to want to see that, but I think we're getting further away from it. The Durbin-Grassley bill would be a way to move some reforms, but it's not everything we'd want to see. One of the things the Durbin-Grassley bill does is it changes the way the H-1B visas are allocated. So you get away from the lottery, and it's allocated rather according to higher degree levels, and then wages. And it also gets rid of larger outsourcing firms and their use of the H-1B visa. It includes a 50-50 rule, where if any employer that has more than 50 employees can have more than 50% H-1B visa employees. So it cuts off to some extent that model. It also increases, the requirements for attestations on wages and recruitments. Tightens up some of the regulatory things through legislation. That could be done through executive decisions, executive orders, but have not been. But again, that doesn't get us all the way there. What Senator Sanders put forward, and we were happy to talk to their office. They've been communicative with us, and we're happy to work with them. But what he's put forward this past week was an amendment that focuses pretty specifically on a couple of things. One, and these are labor priorities too, right? Because again, lifting the standards for H-1B workers lifts standards for all workers. One of the things it does is it increases the amount of time that H-1B workers have to find a new job. It's from 60 days to 120 days. It gives those workers a little more time in the labor market. And sometimes that's like the most important thing, right? Like that's right. We want to organize workers. We want workers to feel like they have options. And the first option any worker has is to quit their job, right? If things are really bad. So giving H-1B workers a little more labor market mobility. It's not perfect, but it gets a little further along. That's important. One of the other things that it has in there is very plainly, award H-1B visas by salary, right? Like get rid of the idea that this is a random lottery. It should just be, if these are high in demand occupations that can't be filled from the domestic labor market, then we should be awarding H-1B visas to the highest paying occupations. It's pretty straightforward to be able to do that. And the last thing is that it allows H-1B workers to self-petition for a green card. Right now, employers control the petitioning of an H-1B worker for a green card. It sounds absolutely absurd to give an employer that much control over an H-1B worker, but it's like this huge carrot that's just dangling in front of somebody that's come to the U.S. to work. And now their employer controls that. So, you can see how coercive that can be and exploitive that can be, right? We would never expect that. I think when people learn that, it's a little shocking because it's like, this is something that you would think happens not in the US, but that's a tremendous amount of control an employer has over a worker. So it gets rid of those things. And we don't know where this is going to end up. I don't expect this to be included in the Lake and Riley Act. There's a number of amendments that have been filed. The Lake and Riley Act is not a bill that IFPTE can support. So, we're happy to see the language in the amendment, but it's possible we see this language that's in the amendment in some other form, in some other bill. And I understand that, Senator Sanders' office, they talked to Senator Durbin's office. Senate Judiciary Committee that Senator Durbin is the ranking member of has jurisdiction over immigration issues and the H-1B. So, it's sort of like, both the Senate Judiciary and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee that Senator Sanders is a ranking member of have a role to play here. So we're hopeful to see something come out of this, but it's good to have legislative text. It's good to have solutions in a language that Congress can, digest and attach to bills. In terms of actually getting reforms done, I don't know. I mean, we look at this Congress and we don't see a lot of opportunities to really move the needle forward. But the division in the Trump supporting world is an opportunity for us to define labor's position, a pro-worker position on this issue very clearly. And, we extend that opportunity any chance we get, right? We take it up. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been kind of frustrating seeing so much of the, I think kind of capitulation, you could call it, on the Lake and Riley Act, because even ICE has come out and said, like, this is just, it's not workable. We can't do this. And like, people don't realize, I don't think, because of because Democrats have not been fighting on the issue, they've been kind of scared to. They don't realize that it would mandate ICE to deport people that have just been arrested, not convicted, arrested, if they are in the country illegally. And so that obviously has all sorts of bad incentives for local police officers, and it's just ICE has said, like, we can't do this. This is not there's way too many unfunded mandates, so to speak. And so it's kind of frustrating that those kind of things are not as widely known as they should be, and why this kind of bill is difficult to support for for unions, even if they were to get some of these pro-labor amendments like Bernie Sanders is pushing out there. So Secretary Treasurer Gay Henson, Legislative Director Faraz Khan of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, I really appreciate y'all's time this morning. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you were able to share with our audience before we let you go?
Yeah, if I could real quick, we're really lucky here at IFPTE. I know Faraz will probably get embarrassed a little here, but we have, you can tell the passion level that our legislative director has on this issue, and he's been working it hard. We are interested in hearing any ideas people have. We love to partner with, what we're partnering right now with AFL-CIO on a whole lot of things, which means a lot of other unions have got their voice in it too. And so it's good, and we're just extremely lucky to have somebody like Faraz here that cares about it so much that he's just all about it, and you can tell that passion he's got in his voice. But unions should be at the forefront, and that's my final thoughts. And we should be involved in any labor policies that have to do with like immigration and work visas and that kind of stuff. And other day somebody from my Tennessee Valley region asked me, I'm in DC today, but they asked me, why would you be involved in that? I don't get it. But it's really all about workers. And if we don't structure these policies and get them right, the initiatives right, they would suffer. They don't realize it. So we're here to make that happen. Like to put some guardrails in place if we can. So,
absolutely.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for it. Enjoyed it. All right, folks. Like I said, Faraz Khan, Legislative Director for the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, IFPTE, International Secretary Treasurer Gay Henson have been talking to us about the H-1B visa program and reforms they would like to see to it. So we'll see. New administration is sworn in on Monday, so we'll see what happens. We'll be following it closely, of course. We're going to take a break really quickly, and we're going to be right back and talk about some opportunities for pro-worker advances in the Alabama legislative session. You don't hear that very often, but there are some exciting opportunities, and so we're excited to be able to talk about it. We're going to take a break really quickly, and we will be right back. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the South. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Matthew in the Facebook chat says, do you know if 92.5 WVNN is off the air? Can't hear the show there, just dead air. Seems to happen a lot lately. Not sure what that's about. I don't know, Ben, if you're listening, if you're hearing this, if you could check that out for us and let us know if something is going on there.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the heads up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the heads up. We will investigate. I've got our team on it. Leanne in the chat says, largest not only. When did that change? So we used to say, back from the second break, we used to say Alabama's only union talk radio program, but we can't say that anymore because now there's a union radio program on the air once a week for half an hour at lunch on Tuesdays, I think is when it is, in Montgomery, put on by the River Region Central Labor Council. So I can't remember the name of the program or the call sign of the show or the station or anything like that. We need to get the host of that show on. It's Corey Springs from IBEW Local 443, and we will get him on the show at some point. But so we are no longer the only union radio program in Alabama. We've never been the only union radio program in the South. There's also the WRFG Labor Forum in Atlanta on, you guessed it, WRFG. They're a union radio program, and I think that's it.
Not Dallas also has one.
Oh yeah, the CWA's. No, the CWA's was in Houston. The CWA has one in Houston, and Dallas is, who is Dallas? Who's the one?
Oh my gosh, his name escapes me. Great brother.
I can see his face right now.
He's been active for a really long time, doing it on the air for a really long time.
Yeah.
There are a few other folks out there who've been doing this, in some cases longer than us.
Yeah, WRFG in Dallas and the CWA in Houston. All three of those have been doing it longer than us. And
But we are
But
really
the Montgomery one is the newest.
Yeah,
one.
newest one. We're really proud of how we do what we do because a lot of shows that are on the radio, that's kind of what they do, is just the radio.
Right.
We are on the radio. We are on podcast. So if you listen to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever app you prefer, you can find us there. You can also find us on YouTube, on Facebook. Throughout the week, we clip and release our segments and interviews on our YouTube and Facebook channels. So, if there's like a specific bit of content that you want to see, just a certain guest maybe you're interested in, or that also makes it easier to share with folks.
Right.
Because I get it. It's a hard commitment to ask someone like, hey, listen to 3 hours of this broadcast. That's not always reasonable. I understand that. But there may be a specific segment that we do on the episode, or a specific interview that we have that you're interested in, or that your friends, your coworkers would be interested in, and you can share that video with them. So we do that throughout the week. Make sure you like and subscribe online, all that good stuff. And if you do listen as a podcast, make sure, actually, even if you don't listen as a podcast,
go find us
but
on
you
the
have
podcast.
an app
Yeah.
that has podcasts, give us a good review. That stuff does really help. It just boost the algorithm or whatever.
Yeah.
So they say.
So they say, yeah. I don't know. I haven't ran the numbers myself, but that's what they say. But we are not the largest union talk radio program in the country. There are two others, at least. There are probably more, but there are at least two others that are significantly larger than ours. That's America's Workforce Union Podcast in Ohio. They're on the radio in Columbus, Ohio.
Cleveland.
In Cleveland. I'm always messing that up, but Flash is great.
We love America's Workforce.
We love America's Workforce.
We have a monthly guest spot on the show.
Yeah.
So between the two of us, at least one of us is on every month, and we really enjoy that.
Yeah. I was recently on, it was last week, I think, that I was on, or maybe the week before. I was talking about what we're about to talk about with this Alabama legislative stuff. But then there's also the Rick Smith Show. He is based out of Pennsylvania, but he is on, America's Workforce is only on one radio station, but they're really big online. Their podcast is in the top 1% of podcasts or something like that. But Rick Smith is on 50 radio stations. He is a working Teamster. He still drives a truck. And then he comes home every day and he goes into his studio and he records a whole hour of content every single day. He used to do 3 hours he used to do a 3-hour daily talk program from 7 to 10 p.m. every night.
Wow.
After work. Yeah, it's crazy. He only does 1 hour now. But he's on 50 radio stations and also on Free Speech TV and as a podcast and all that good stuff. Lots of other good union radio out there.
Yeah, this was a good time to make another plug for the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Just Google that, and if you're interested in this kind of content, there are other programs out there, especially for those of you who are listening outside of the South. Welcome again to our Canadian sisters and brothers who are listening. We appreciate you. But yeah, there's shows from the Pacific Northwest. There's shows from up north. There's shows from Canada. There are, there's a growing labor media space, both in radio and podcast and YouTube. But, of course, in written journalism as well. And so it's been really cool to see the revival of labor media over the last few years. As the labor movement has gotten more energy and been re-energized and resurgent to some degree, the media has also kind of grown with that too. And so now, if you think about it, you can point to several good labor journalists out there at various outlets. Even in some outlets where maybe I'm not a fan of the outlet, but they're a good reporter.
Right.
And then you have, like I said, the growth in the radio, online media space. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more house cleaning thing before we get into this legislative stuff. I just wanted to let y'all know that in overtime, we got a really great overtime lined up. We're going to be talking to labor attorney Matt
Bruenig about how he absolutely destroyed Steven Crowder in court, got a bunch of money for one of his former employees. Also going to be talking to Jeff Schurke, a labor historian, journalist, union activist, and assistant professor at the Harry Van Arsdale Jr. School of Labor Studies at SUNY Empire State University in New York City. He is the author of, and I didn't bring the book, but the author of Blue Collar Empire, a book about the AFL-CIO's international work in the 20th century, which was unfortunately decidedly not good. And so we're going to talk through some of that history and wrestle with how we wrestle with some of the more unsavory parts of the American labor movement's past. So it'll be a
really looking forward to that. I'm always interested in conspiracies. I'm always interested in the CIA and their influence on things, and of course interested in unions. So you throw all that together, there's some history in there with it too. I'm here for it. So looking forward to that interview.
All right, so Adam, talk to us about this this stuff that's going on in Alabama. Alabama's legislative session is starting in a couple of weeks. I don't know the date exactly, but sometime early February, and there are some pieces of legislation that that the labor movement is supportive of. Talk to us about what are we anticipating happening down in Montgomery this year?
Yeah, so the legislative session, let me make sure I've got this date correct. Yes, it is February 4th, Tuesday, February 4th. So there will be, quite a bit on the agenda. This is notably the last legislative session before the next round of elections. The primary elections are coming up in May of 2026. So, a lot of commentators and observers of the legislature think that, whatever work's going to get done over the next 2 years is going to happen this year, for the most part. Probably not a lot to happen next year. So there's a lot of issues that labor is supporting and dealing with here in the state. There are opportunities to make things better. Not that that's surprising because, as we often say on this show, Alabama ranks at or near the top of everything bad and at or near the bottom of everything good. Our quality of life here in Alabama, it's not great. I mean, I told someone I was talking to yesterday, we would be overjoyed if we had the average American quality of life for working class people here in Alabama. That said, there are solutions that are going to be in front of legislators in Montgomery coming up in a couple weeks. So one issue that has been big on people's minds has been the child labor scandals here in the state of Alabama. Very famously, the Hyundai Corporation has been associated with this, alongside temporary staffing agencies that have typically been involved. And so one piece of legislation that a lot of folks are supporting, Jobs to Move America, Alabama Arise, the North Alabama Area Labor Council, and others, this piece of legislation would take state tax incentives away from corporations that violate child labor law. And I think that's a really interesting piece of legislation because just last year, Alabama passed Senate Bill 231, which does something similar. It takes tax incentives away from corporations, but in this case, if they voluntarily recognize a union, right? So if a company decides that they actually respect their workers, and they respect their workers when they exercise their rights to organize, right? Because what that means is a majority of the workers have signed cards to join the union. They go to the boss and say, hey, we're a union now. We have a majority. Here's our proof. Will you just go ahead and recognize us so we can, move to the next step and start negotiating? The state of Alabama says, no. You cannot voluntarily recognize that union. You must force a secret ballot election with the NLRB and all the cost and time delays that are associated with that. You must do so, or we'll take your tax incentives away from you. And Alabama gives quite a lot of tax incentives to corporations. If I recall, it's over $1 billion have been given to the auto industry in the state of Alabama, just the auto industry, right? So this is a big deal. So again, the reform being proposed this year is, okay, if you violate child labor law, the state of Alabama, our taxpayers, should not subsidize you. You should not benefit from we, the public, right? You should not benefit from our resources if you can't follow the law. If you can't even follow the law on child labor. Because we have seen really terrible tales coming out of this state and across the country. This is not just an Alabama problem. It's a growing problem across the country where we've seen a rise in child labor, particularly among migrant communities, often exploited, and trafficked migrant children who are being forced to work in very dangerous situations, very dangerous environments that are dangerous for adults, right, and illegal for children to work in. So we've seen that happening. We've also seen a rash of legislation from state to state, including here in Alabama, to weaken child labor laws, right? So as we're having more problems with this, a problem that a lot of us thought was, solved a century ago, as we're having more problems with this, there are bills, circulating, often by special interest groups like ALEC, which weaken these laws and make it easier for companies to get away with it, make it harder for the state to enforce, right? All these sorts of things. So that is a good piece of legislation to take tax incentives away from companies that break child labor laws. There are lots of opportunities to push positive reforms when it comes to these tax incentives, right? Because we don't have to stop there. We could keep going and look at other issues that are relevant to workers, right? Because again, if we should use the public money for the public good. So why not put some strings attached to these tax incentives? We could address other issues like paid parental leave. We could address retirement benefits. We could look at scheduling, right? A big issue that we hear from workers all over the state is about scheduling. The lack of consistent scheduling, having to work on rotating shifts that are just brutal to your body, your mind, your family, overwork and having to work 50, 60, more than that hours a week. These are all issues that we could address by attaching strings to tax incentives. So those are opportunities for sure. I do want to mention on the subject of paid parental leave, there has been, a lot of momentum to actually grant paid parental leave to state employees in Alabama, including potentially educators. A lot of folks may not realize it, but that's, the case is that, your kid's teacher does not have any form of parental leave. If they give birth to a child, they have to have, some sick leave built up in their account, some personal days, that sort of thing. They could take an unpaid leave of absence, of course, but, we need paid parental leave, period, for all workers in this state. But absolutely, the state can start with its own employees. So that's a big opportunity. The legislation made it pretty far last year. So it's not just coming out of left field. There's real momentum behind it. And I think that's really exciting because that is a pro-family reform, right? All these politicians love to talk about family values, how they love the kids, they love the babies, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you do, speak to it with real policies that support families, and paid parental leave is one of those policies. So really looking forward to seeing that. There's, a lot of other, pieces of legislation that I think will be coming up that will be worth looking into. I do recommend folks try to stay informed. There's going to be a lot flying around, good and bad. There's going to be bad bills that you're going to want to see defeated. There's going to be good bills that you're going to want to see pushed through. But it's going to take people power to help make progress. Right? You do actually have to contact your lawmakers, try to build a rapport with them, make sure that you're contacting them on a regular basis and getting other people to do the same. right? Talk to people about these kind of issues. Those were just a couple specific examples, but you and I and several of us were at the Madison County Legislative Forum a couple weeks ago. The entire legislative delegation for Madison County. It was like 14 of them, because there's so many different ones that have at least a sliver of the county. They were all there. It was a packed room, and residents from the community got up and spoke passionately about their issues. And I was, pleasantly impressed with quite a few of them. We heard one sister talk about public education and the potential impact of the CHOOSE Act, which is the private school voucher program. So that was really great to hear. But there were a lot of issues being brought up, a lot of issues. And so, the libraries was something else that came up, and there was really a passionate speaker. Susan did a great job talking about the libraries and, the impending criminalization of librarians. They are pushing some really ridiculous legislation that would strengthen oversight of libraries, as they would put it. But it's really going to have some devastating impacts, both on libraries and the people they serve, but, on the workers themselves who actually work in these facilities.
Yeah, there's a couple other pieces of legislation that I wanted to talk about. There's one, the overtime tax cut. We spoke about that some last year when it passed. And so what Alabama has done is they have eliminated the state income tax on overtime wages. This was initially projected to cost the Education Trust Fund. It's coming out of the Education Trust Fund. All this money is coming out of the Education Trust Fund. It was initially projected to only cost about $40 million. Now an estimate has come out of the cost of the first 9 months, putting the first 9 months cost at $240 million. Now that number is being contested by Anthony Daniels, the author of the overtime tax cut. He says that the estimates are wrong. He says that actually somehow this tax cut is generating more revenue because it's both attracting more employers and the people who are spending money but that they have in their pocket are generating sales tax revenue. I don't know. Frankly, I don't believe that. I think he's wrong. That doesn't make sense to me. But that's what he says. And since he has started pushing back the person who initially came out with that $240 million estimate, Arthur Orr, the chair of the State Senate Budget Committee, is kind of walking it back and kind of saying like, I don't know, maybe it's not actually $240 million, maybe it's like something else. I don't know. So, I don't know. But what I do know is that now that it exists, and this is a benefit for, definitionally working people, basically, right? I mean, if you're working overtime, you're almost certainly a working person. And so, that's good, and we're happy for it, and we don't think that this benefit should be removed for people. We think, if there actually is a real serious dent in the Education Trust Fund that needs to be filled, there are other places to fill it than with revenue from working people. You could, for instance, repeal the CHOOSE Act, which is going to put a huge dent in the Education Trust Fund for the state of Alabama. You could also repeal the federal income tax deduction. Alabama is one of only two states in the country to allow you to deduct your some of your federal income tax from your state income tax. This benefit only benefits low-income Alabamians to the tune of like $3 a year, and even upper-income Alabamians only benefit by like $549 a year. But the top 1% of taxpayers in Alabama benefit to the tune of $12,000 annually. If you repealed this tax cut, you would be able to generate $830 million a year, according to Alabama Arise. So that would more than plug even the most expensive estimate of the cost of the overtime tax cut, it would also cover the shortfalls from the CHOOSE Act, the School Choice Act, the school voucher programs. And so, those are all, those are, and you could always, and I said this in the legislative forum, I said, you could always just tax wealthy people. Like, you could always just take money from the rich. That's always an option, even if, people in Alabama or the politicians in Alabama don't really want to hear that. There are other couple of really good tax incentive pieces of legislation. One that would tie tax incentives to not having mandatory overtime, because as a pro-family state, we think that workers should have the time to be able to spend time with their children. We think that's important. And so if we actually think that's important, we should say any company that we give tax incentives to, you can't have mandatory overtime as a normal policy. You can't do that. There's also legislation potentially to tie economic incentives to paid parental leave policies and stuff like that. So there's some other good ones, and we're going to be talking more about that in the future. We need to book Neil Rafferty on. I think we need to get Neil Rafferty on the program. He's the state house representative who's sponsoring a lot of this legislation. So I'm going to try to do that maybe before the session starts and talk to him about that. But yeah, so those are some of the things that we're tracking.
Yeah, and real quick before we move on, a couple of other hot topics. Criminal justice reform is always a hot topic in Alabama. We have one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, which has the highest incarceration rate in the planet. Right, so we are locking up more people inside of our borders than almost anywhere else on planet Earth. Seems like a problem. We are potentially opening some $1 billion prison named after Governor Kay Ivey. Another issue that is really coming up a lot is the prison labor situation. There's been some more and more great reporting coming out about the exploitation of incarcerated workers, workers who are apparently, safe enough to work for any number of corporations, whether it's, Hyundai, as we've talked about, to McDonald's, to the city of Montgomery. Apparently, it's cool that they work there, but they are being systematically denied parole, right? And so you have issues like this. The prison labor situation is something that comes up a lot in the community. A lot of people are just really horrified by it, because the more you read into it, the more it really sounds like modern day convict lease labor, which, again, like the child labor phenomena, we thought we fixed that like 100 years ago. But turns out it's a recurring issue. And another one I have to mention is Medicaid expansion. There's a lot of talk in D.C. about what's going to happen with Obamacare. So who knows what the future, brings for federal health care and the landscape there. But the bottom line is that hospitals continue to close in this state. There are hundreds of thousands of Alabamians without health care, and we absolutely could do something about it. And unfortunately, you have special interests like Alpha Insurance pushing their garbage plan, which is, being sold as a solution to this problem, and absolutely is not. It would make it worse, but it would make them money. So you have issues like that. You've got a lot of special interest in Montgomery. So make sure you're talking to your lawmakers, because I can guarantee you that folks with a lot of money and a lot of power and influence are definitely in their ear.
Let's do Boss Watch. Boss Watch is a segment that we try to do every week where we take a look at what bosses were up to in the South and across the country. In Florida, a U.S. Department of Labor investigation determined a mulberry phosphatic fertilizer manufacturer failed to follow required safety standards, leading to the tragic loss of a 29-year-old process operator in July of 2024. Investigators with the department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration found that Mosaic Fertilizer LLC did not insure the rotating portion of the East and West industrial ribbon blenders, a device that mixes the finished fertilizer with a coating oil. They didn't ensure that portion had the proper guarding in place or secured. The worker, who was collecting a sample for analysis, suffered fatal injuries after falling into the unguarded ribbon blender. This unfortunate incident could have been prevented had Mosaic Fertilizer LLC ensured all machines were secured and safeguarded, said OSHA Area Director Danielle Gendra in Tampa, Florida. In this case, the employer failed to protect workers as the law requires. No employee should lose their life because an employer neglects basic safety measures. OSHA issued the employer 2 serious violations and a proposed penalty of $30,000. Over in Louisiana, the U.S. Department of Labor has recovered about $500,000 in back wages and liquidated damages from 2 Northeast Louisiana home care companies that misclassified 88 workers as independent contractors, depriving them of overtime wages in violation of federal law. The department's Wage and Hour Division found that 24 employees of the Stonewall-based Inner Quality Services, LLC, and 64 employees of the Shreveport-based Sincere Client Care Services, LLC, were misclassified as independent contractors and paid straight-time rates for all hours worked, including over 40 in a work week. The division recovered $70,000 in back wages and an equal amount in liquidated damages from Inner Quality Services for affected employees, and $153,000 in back wages and an equal amount in liquidated damages for the affected employees at Sincere Client Care Services to resolve their Fair Labor Standards Act violations. The Wage and Hour Division takes employee misclassification seriously, and we will continue to hold employers accountable when workers are denied their lawfully earned wages, said Wage and Hour Division District Director Troy Mouton in New Orleans. Misclassification often results in workers losing critical workplace protections and benefits, including overtime pay. This practice is unfair to workers and other employers who classify their workforce correctly. Staying in Louisiana, the findings of 2 recent U.S. Department of Labor investigations show misclassification of employees as independent contractors in an ongoing concern for home care industry workers in Louisiana and throughout the nation, as the practice deprives them of their full wages and other important benefits. Investigations by the department's Wage and Hour Division found that 2 South Louisiana companion care providers, We Care Homes Incorporated and Special Needs Unlimited LLC, misclassified a total of 158 employees as independent contractors, and by doing so, failed to pay them $422,000 in overtime wages. Home care workers employed by We Care Homes and Special Needs Unlimited typically worked long hours and providing essential services for people unable to care for themselves. In exchange, they deserve to be paid for their full wages, said Wage and Hour Division Director Troy Mouton in New Orleans. We are determined to protect workers' rights and hold employers accountable for meeting their legal obligations. To resolve the violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the division recovered $422,000 in back overtime wages and an equal amount in liquidated damages for a total recovery of over $844,000. Specifically, the division recovered $634,000 from We Care Homes for 123 affected employees and $202,000 for 35 affected employees at Special Needs Unlimited. This segment of Boss Watch, Union Busters, covering national updates, is sponsored by Labor Lab. Labor Lab is an employer watchdog organization. They're committed to safeguarding the right to organize through unions, collective bargaining, and mutual aid. They do this by combing through reports that Union Busters are required to file with the Department of Labor. Here are last week's updates. PetSmart in Fairfield, California, paid LRI Consulting $425 an hour for their services. PetSmart workers have recently begun organizing across the country with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW. LRI Consulting subcontracted Evelyn Fregroso of Quality Labor Solutions. She was compensated $200 an hour. Fregroso was previously a union organizer with the United Farm Workers, UFW, and Teamsters Local 396 in California before joining the union busting sector in 2012. That work has proved much more lucrative, obviously. She was paid $70,000 for 1 month of work during a union busting campaign in 2023. The election at PetSmart was held on the 3rd of January, and results are pending. S&S Activewear in Bolingbrook, Illinois, also hired LR consultants. They did not disclose the amount of compensation. That is it for Boss Watch this week. We have several dishonorable mentions that you will have to subscribe to our newsletter to get. You can do that at tvlr.fm/contact. We're about to head into the second half of our program today. Appreciate you all tuning in. Like I said, we've got a great overtime lined up for you. We're going to be talking to Jeff Schurke and Matt Bruenig. Adam, was there anything else in 10 or 15 seconds that you wanted to make sure that we got to?
Yeah, go to labornotes.org/events. There are several good trainings coming up on January 27th, 29th, the 30th, and then that first week of February. Stewards workshops, organizing training, national call, lots of good stuff. So go to labornotes.org/events to check that out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. And thanks again for tuning in. We have a great overtime lined up for you. We are also, in addition to those interviews, going to be talking about MLK Day, which is coming up on Monday. And we'll take your calls at 844-899-TVLR. But if you are only listening to us on the radio and you don't get overtime, then again, appreciate you tuning in. And we will see you next week. All right, folks, we are off the radio now. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We're going to take a break really quickly, and we will be right back with Overtime.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio program in the Southern United States. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We've got a great overtime lined up for you. We're going to be talking shortly to Jeff Schurke about his new book, Blue Collar Empire, which talks about the some of the not so great history of the AFL-CIO's international operations. We're also going to be playing a pre-taped interview that I did last week with Matt Bruenig about his case against Steven Crowder. Really excited for y'all to hear that. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, 844-899-8857 if you would like to call in. Steve says Monday is Atlanta's version of May Day. Labor gatherers to march through the streets of Atlanta. That's really cool. So I guess there's a big, presumably an MLK Day holiday, and that's kind of the thing that the parade that the unions in Atlanta really glom onto. That's exciting, and that's a cool. That's cool. Send us some pictures. Or tell us how it goes. I'm assuming that you'll be there. Doodle A Cupcake says, greetings from Miami, Florida. Bosses are cutting us up down here. Glad to hear people are still fighting back. Indeed. If you're in Florida, you should definitely be following McKenna Schuler, staff writer for the Orlando Weekly. She does good reporting about Florida, particularly labor reporting about Florida, not just in Orlando. She also has a newsletter, Caring Class Revolt, caringclassrevolt.substack.com, that you can find that has really good stuff. Definitely recommend you checking that out. Don't have any callers on the line right now. So Adam, you had a couple of reflections on about MLK Day that you wanted to spend some time ruminating on.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to start by saying we'll talk more next week. And I think, we had talked about having some clips next week. So this is just part one of the conversation. But I wanted to start by sharing some thoughts that my unions have put out. Longtime listeners will know I'm a member of two unions. I belong to both IATSE, Local 900, here in Huntsville. Also belong to CWA, Communication Workers of America. CWA Local 3908, which is based in Montgomery, but my bargaining unit is statewide. I wanted to start with what my unions were saying and what they had to say about the holiday and what's going on there. And last week, there was the AFL-CIO's MLK conference, the MLK Junior Civil and Human Rights Conference. It took place in Austin, Texas. So you had folks from, dozens of different unions across the country. They gathered to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of collective action, reinforce the long-standing bond between the labor and civil rights movements, and channel their strength and energy into substantial action to build worker power. CWA's president, Claude Cummings Jr., was there alongside quite a number of other folks from CWA leadership and just membership as well. President Cummings spoke about the importance of labor solidarity, the convergence of the labor and civil rights movements, and the duty of union members to continue the fight for both economic prosperity and social justice. In our unions, we do, in fact, have many voices, President Cummings remarked. We work in different industries and have different job titles. We live in rural areas, in suburbs, and in cities. We are of different races and genders, and yes, we hold different political views. But we all come together when working class lives are at stake. So I wanted to, mention that. Appreciate the AFL-CIO for putting on that conference. Last year it was in Montgomery. I was able to attend at least a little bit of the first part of that. Really cool. Really appreciate that happening here in Alabama last year. Hope it'll come back pretty close so we can check it out again. So moving on, I wanted to share IATSE and what the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees had to say in terms of honoring Dr. King's vision together and looking at the holiday as a day of service and reflection. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lived a life of profound purpose, guided by an unwavering commitment to working people. His final days, much like the years between 1956 and 1968, were devoted to organizing for fair wages and better working conditions. Many listeners may know that Dr. King's final act or final action was in supporting striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. So IATSE encourages folks to reflect on his powerful words from the 1967 Blueprint speech to students at Barrett Junior High School in Philadelphia. Dr. King said, quote, "Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness." He goes on to say, "In your life's blueprint must be a commitment to the eternal principles of beauty, love, and justice." Well, life for none of us has been a crystal stair, but we must keep moving. We must keep moving. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving. And so the IATSE Diversity Committee urges all members to embrace these principles as we continue Dr. King's fight for an organized, just, and dignified workplace. And, it is worth really making that connection to folks. A lot of folks have a pretty superficial, understanding of Dr. King's legacy or in his history and his accomplishments. And many people just don't really conceptually think of Dr. King as a labor leader, but he absolutely was, and, certainly was an organizer. And so it's worth thinking about that and thinking about the connection between labor rights and civil rights. Often, it seems like in my experience, these movements have been kind of siloed, and people who are passionate about unions maybe aren't the same people or working in the same, spaces as people who are passionate about racial justice. And same goes for maybe environmental justice and other issues that are important to working people. But it's really important that it's all connected, that we're all working together, that we're all collaborating, because all these issues are connected. We all experience them. We all deal with them as working people. And, I guess my last thoughts, at least for this weekend, is that speaking of the holiday, this Monday, it's kind of a cruel irony that is Trump's inauguration, in my opinion, that it's on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. I want to just take that moment and the news of a potential ceasefire in Gaza. I think between the two of those is worth remembering Dr. King's firm commitment to anti-imperialism, which he articulated very notably in his 1967 address, Beyond Vietnam. And something he said, which I find really powerful and I really appreciated, was wisdom born of experience should tell us that war is obsolete. There may have been a time when war served as a negative good, preventing the spread and growth of an evil force. But the destructive power of modern weapons eliminates even the possibility that war may serve as a negative good. If we assume that life is worth living and that man has a right to survive, then we must find an alternative to war. During these days of human travail, we must not permit ourselves to lapse into pessimism. We must organize for peace. And I really appreciate that, and I think it is often, at least in my lifetime, the movement for peace has not been as loud as the movement for war. And it's really important that we have alternatives because too many working class folks across this world have been killed in needlessly in so many conflicts, continue to be to this day. So really appreciate that aspect of his legacy, and I think that's a good segue into our upcoming guest, because he is going to talk a little bit about the foreign policy of the labor movement and some of the connections with the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and talk about conflicts, talk about wars and bloodshed around the globe for profit. Learning some of that history as a teenager really, really opened my eyes. That kind of history shaped who I am today. It shaped the whole journey I've been on throughout my life. Learning some of the facts about what American foreign policy has done to other people around this globe, whether it's in the name of fighting communism, whether it's, spreading democracy, whatever, fighting terrorism. We've heard it called a lot of different things, but American empire has been a very bipartisan consensus throughout my life and before it. We've seen politicians from both parties supporting endless wars, supporting coups, and supporting, sanctions, cruel sanctions regimes, embargoes. I did notice President Biden, in one of his final acts, did finally take Cuba back off the state sponsor of terror list. I guess he didn't have time to do that the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder, President Obama had removed them back then during his term. Again, it was a lot of too little too late, but, it happened. Trump immediately put them back on, or put them back on before he left. It may have actually been tail end of his term as well. And then Biden waited around for 4 years. But anyway, those things are on my mind.
Before we transition to the interview, I wanted to just retell a couple, at least one story from Alabama's labor movement that illustrates the really deep connection that the labor and civil rights movements have had in the past in some instances, which is not to say in all instances, and indeed in some instances they have been directly opposed, and in some cases unions have been opponents of civil rights movements, and that's another kind of dark part of our history that we as union activists today do have to wrestle with and have to guard ourselves against. But there are also really, really cool episodes in the history of the labor movement, and really cool threads that run deeply and all throughout the history of the labor movement, that have linked labor and civil rights. And in one of those that I have always, that ever since I read it in a book about a year ago, I've just every time I get the opportunity to tell people about it, I do. And that's the mine workers in Alabama who, mining began in Alabama, I think shortly before the Civil War, but it never didn't take off for a long time, and then in the 1880s and 1890s it started on a more significant upsurge, and in the 1870s is the earliest that we can see mine worker organizing in the state of Alabama. And from its inception it has been interracial. There's never been a point in Alabama history that coal miners we're not in the same union. We're not in the same organization. And that is really cool. And so in the 1880s, miners were organizing with the Greenback Labor Party. Black and white miners together. In the 1890s, it was with the Knights of Labor. And then in the late 1890s, it was with the United Mine Workers, and that's the organization that the miners have stayed with basically throughout the history of the state. And if you know much about history, you'll know that in the 1870s and 1880s, and even in the early 1890s, it's not that surprising that black and white miners would be part of the same organization, because that was during the Reconstruction period, where before the Redeemers took office and before the Bourbon Democrats took office and reinstituted white supremacy across the South. But what is more surprising, if you're a student of history, was that during this period in the South, and in Alabama specifically, when the Redeemers took office, overturned Reconstruction, rewrote the state constitution specifically to disenfranchise black people and enshrine and constitutionalize white supremacy, the white miners did not eject their black brothers from their organization, the United Mine Workers. In 1901, in the same year that white supremacists in Alabama rewrote our state constitution. The same constitution, by the way, that we're under today, to disenfranchise black folks. Of course, a lot of the kind of racist stuff in that constitution has been overturned, but a lot of the structures still remain. We can talk about that another time. But in the same year that constitution was written, the United Mine Workers fought back against segregationist policies at the Birmingham Labor Council. And they said, if you do not allow our black members in your union hall for when we have these labor council meetings, we will disaffiliate. We will not be a part of a labor federation that does not recognize our members. And they won. They were able to get the Birmingham Labor Council to allow their black members to be a part of these meetings. That is so freaking cool. And that is some of the best of our past as people in the labor movement. And so it is in that spirit that I want to conduct my work within the labor movement. And again, like I say, whenever I talk about that episode, it's not to say that the United Mine Workers was always perfect or that they had perfectly progressive racial policies, and there were some things that they were doing even then that we wouldn't support today. Black people were not allowed to be the president of the district or the local unions, but black people were always the vice president when there was a good portion of black folks there, and that was very, very progressive for the time, to be a black vice president of a mixed organization, So love being able to tell that story about the history of the labor movement in Alabama and the ties between the fights for civil rights and good working conditions. One more thing before we bring on Jeff, I wanted to issue a small correction to some of IFPTE's interview. The legislative director, Faraz Khan, sent me an email asking that I include this correction. He said that the amendment that Bernie Sanders put forward to the Laken-Riley Act does not change the random allocation lottery to highest wages first, nor does it have self-petitioning for the green card. The legislative text to allow H-1B workers to self-petition will take a bit more time to develop, and IFPTE is interested in pursuing that legislation. And so what Bernie's amendment to the Laken-Riley Act does is 4 things. It raises the prevailing wage requirement in the law to the, quote, real median wage, which gets closer to aligning H-1B worker pay with what workers already in the U.S. are earning. It gives H-1B workers 120 days to find new employment at an H-1B employer, doubling the current 60-day window. He said that. It prohibits an employer that has filed a WARN layoff notice in the past year from having their H-1B petition approved. This also covers third-party employers and contractors, so the employer cannot skirt the requirement by outsourcing to a firm using H-1B employees, and it increases employer fees for the H-1B to fund the National Science Foundation scholarships further. So there's the correction that Faraz Khan wanted me to issue, and I appreciate that. So Jeff Schurke is a labor historian, journalist, union activist, and assistant professor at the Harry Van Arsdale Jr. School of Labor Studies at SUNY Empire State University in New York City, New York. He is a frequent contributor to In These Times and Jacobin, and his scholarship has been published in Diplomatic History in Labor, Studies in Working Class History. He is the author of a new book, Blue Collar Empire, The Untold Story of U.S. Labor's Global Anti-Communist Crusade, How the CIA Used American Unions to Undermine Workers at Home and Subvert Democracy Abroad. Jeff, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for taking the time this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Really excited to have you. And the first question, I think, that is worth asking is, why write this book, what are you hoping that unions and that union members like myself and Adam and folks that are listening, we just got a comment in the chat, the Pocatello Central Labor Council is listening from Idaho right now. So what are you hoping that folks like us take from your examination of these sort of darker parts of the American labor movement's history?
I think it's a really crucial part of labor history, even though it is, not it's a kind of shameful, unfortunate part of U.S. labor history, but it's crucial in understanding the sort of trajectory of the labor movement in the 20th century, how we went from being, 35% union density, the strongest that the labor movement ever was in the United States before or since in the mid 20th century. And then, the decline that has happened since, where now it's only 10% union density. Of course, there's many reasons for that have been studied and discussed, just corporate attacks on unions and right-wing political attacks and deindustrialization and offshoring and all of that. But another part of the story, I think, has to do with the fact that while organized labor was so powerful in the mid 20th century after World War II, the high-ranking labor officials were devoting so much time and energy and resources towards waging this anti-communist crusade abroad, working hand in hand with the U.S. government, with the CIA, with the State Department, in just dozens of countries in Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, supporting U.S. wars, controversial wars, most infamously the Vietnam War. And I'm talking about labor officials here, not the labor movement at large doing these things. For the most part, rank and file members, local leaders, staff were not really even totally aware that a lot of this was happening in their name. And when they did become aware, in different instances during the Vietnam War or some of the interventions in Central America when Reagan was president in the 80s, the rank and file local leaders and unions pushed back and fought back against this. So part of what I'm hoping unionists will get out of this book is just, number one, learning this history, because often it hasn't really been discussed or talked about because it is so controversial, and it can sometimes almost seem like a conspiracy theory when you start talking about the CIA. But this is actual history, and we need to know about it in order to understand the importance of international solidarity with workers in other countries, and that as we are trying to rebuild the labor movement and organizing the unorganized, to also have discussions and think about what kind of labor movement do we want to have when it comes to questions of war and peace and internationalism, and what kind of relationship should top labor officials with the AFL-CIO or major unions, what kind of relationship should they have with the U.S. government? Does the rank and file have a say in all of that? So these are questions of union democracy as well. So I think it's just, again, a very crucial part of labor history that is mostly still not very well known, or only little bits and pieces of it are known. So I was trying to kind of put it all together into this one book, at least covering the Cold War time period, which is pretty, an important time period.
Right. And, it's definitely something that a lot of people don't know. Even some of the people, as they were elected to their international's presidency, you tell a story about how AFSCME's, I think his name was Jerry Worf, was elected, or it was some character was elected to the presidency of AFSCME, and found in the international headquarters a literal CIA office, and he goes and he's like, what are these guys doing here? Why are they in my union headquarters? What's going on? And he kicks them out, and so people, even as he's running for the presidency of his international union, he's got no idea that the AFSCME is so entangled with the CIA that these spooks literally have an office in the union's international headquarters. I mean, it's really amazing how kind of under wraps some of this stuff is, and some of it is still coming out. I mean, one episode that's not in your book, I don't think I remember reading about this, was with the United Steelworkers and Firestone. There was a strike in the 1990s where the United Steelworkers was trying to do some corporate corporate attacks on Firestone, and they uncovered support of Firestone supporting a Liberian warlord because they have an agricultural plantation in Liberia, and so they wanted to kind of keep these people from organizing and from being able to have good wages and working conditions, and the United Steelworkers uncovered the support that Firestone had for the warlord, and in an agreement with basically in concession during contract negotiations, the USW agreed not to go public with this information. So this was just in the 90s, right? And that was only uncovered in 2015 by ProPublica. And so some of this stuff is still relatively new and coming out. And one of the more troubling themes that you identify is how, in many cases, it was like self-started by officials within the AFL-CIO. Can you give us a rough timeline of the AFL's involvement in international affairs, particularly in the beginning, and how they were kind of really, going ahead of the CIA?
You could go as far back as 1898, the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. took over, Puerto Rico and Guam and the Philippines and occupied Cuba, and really the 1910s with the Mexican Revolution and World War I, where the AFL president Samuel Gompers was trying to, earn respectability and legitimacy in the eyes of the U.S. government and corporate America by sort of supporting the war effort and saying workers are not going to go on strike and disrupt, military production and things like that. So that's kind of how far back the AFL's involvement in foreign affairs goes. But the AFL was also, throughout the early 20th century, kind of this battleground between radicals, particularly communists, and business unionists like Samuel Gompers, where the leftist trade unionists, communists, and others were trying to pull the AFL and its affiliated unions and labor councils in a more class-conscious, militant direction, trying to get out of craft unionism and propose industrial unionism, where all the workers in a single industry were unionized, which is not the way the AFL generally organized back then. And so throughout, especially in the 1920s, there were a lot of these internal battles in the AFL, and it ended up being the anti-communists who won and pushed all the communists and leftists out of the AFL, more or less. And then in the 30s, with the Depression and the New Deal and the creation of the CIO, a lot of those leftists and communists, went into the CIO and built up unions like the UAW and the United Electrical Workers, International Longshore Warehouse Union, and others, and were very racially inclusive, gender inclusive, and rapidly organized millions of previously unorganized workers. So, but the AFL remained strongly anti-communist. So then during World War II, you have the US and Soviet Union becoming allies to fight their common enemy, Hitler. And as the war was ending in 1945, there was a hope among some people in the United States that this alliance between the US and Soviet Union might continue in order to prevent some other world war from happening in the future. This is what Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted before he died. He wanted to continue this alliance with the Soviet Union in the name of international cooperation. And you see a little bit of that with the United Nations being created and including both the Soviet Union and the US, communist countries and capitalist countries. Even though they didn't have a lot in common, they decided to come together and form the UN. And likewise, major trade union confederations, labor federations in the Allied countries in Britain and France and the Soviet Union and the US came together in 1945 to create a new international labor group called the World Federation of Trade Unions. And the CIO joined on behalf of U.S. labor, but the AFL actually boycotted it because it included communists. So even before World War II was actually over, and when the U.S. and Soviets were still allies, AFL officials like George Meany, who eventually became the president of the AFL and AFL-CIO, were publicly saying, we don't want anything to do with the Soviets. We should not have peace with them because they're evil communists and we can't trust them and we can never work with them. While the CIO was actually trying to work with the Soviets still in the name of, again, international cooperation and world peace. And so the AFL created a new like international arm to start sending representatives to Western Europe, where some of the trade union federations, like in France and Italy, were led by members of those countries' communist parties, and to try to like create divisions within those other countries' labor movements to get the non-communists to become full-fledged anti-communists and to break away and form rival separate labor federations. And the AFL was initially doing this on its own with very little money, very few resources, because the Cold War between the U.S. and Soviets hadn't really started yet. In 1945, 46. It wasn't until more like 1947, 48 that the Cold War was really getting started and the CIA was created. And once that happened, the CIA looked at what the AFL had already been doing over the last couple of years of, dividing labor movements abroad along these Cold War battle lines of saying, pick a side, you're either with the United States or the Soviet Union, you're either with the capitalists, or so-called free world or the evil communist world. And so the CIA, by the late 40s, decided to kind of recruit the AFL and start giving more money, because the AFL, again, had been doing this on its own. But now, by about 1949, 1950, the AFL had lots of money and resources from the CIA to continue doing this work of trying to split labor movements, not only in Europe, but now also in Latin America and Asia. And this was the same time of the McCarthyism and the Red Scare in the US, and the CIO turned anti-communist itself. It broke away from that international body I mentioned, the World Federation of Trade Unions, and the CIO expelled its communist-led unions. And it was only a few years later, 1955, that the CIO then merged with the AFL. And so really the AFL-CIO was born as a product of the Cold War. And it was really founded in anti-communism as kind of like a founding ideology. And from there, it just continued working with not only the CIA, but the State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development, and later the National Endowment for Democracy. These are all different agencies within the U.S. government's like foreign policy apparatus to continue trying to make sure that labor movements in other countries wouldn't embrace any kind of left-wing, militant, class-conscious political orientation. They would usually say communism, but it oftentimes, could be any kind of political movement that it may not have been communist, but if it was sort of opposing the power of the United States, opposing capitalism, then it would just be labeled communist. And the AFL-CIO, working with the CIA and State Department, et cetera, would kind of go in and try to again, undermine those more radical labor movements and prop up more kind of a more business union model of unions working hand in hand with corporations and with oftentimes, corrupt anti-communist governments across the world. And I think I argue in the book that is partly what made it easier for corporations to move U.S. jobs overseas later on in the 80s and 90s with offshoring and deindustrialization, because the labor movements in some of these places in Latin America and the Caribbean and Asia, the more militant class-conscious labor movements that might have fought back against that exploitation of sweatshops and so on, they had all been undermined for many years by the AFL-CIO itself in the name of anti-communism.
Right. And most of the episodes in your book that you go over are interventions by the AFL-CIO or American unions in quote unquote third world countries. But there were also interventions in Europe, in France and Poland, in particular. And so could you give us an overview of the episode in France, because I think that I think that one's worth digging into a little bit, just as an illustration of how, you know, this kind of intervention in internal union politics of other countries has not only been limited to quote unquote third world countries. They've also intervened in Europe, and also because what they did in France was it was really sort of a playbook for a lot of the other, they followed a similar kind of plan in other countries. So what were some of the things that the AFL-CIO did in France to hamper the French labor movement?
So that's, really at the kind of the beginning of the story, or the beginning of the Cold War, when it was still just the AFL on its own before it merged with the CIO. France, coming out of World War II, of course, France had been occupied by the Nazis during World War II. And there was this anti-fascist underground resistance in France. And one of the leading players of the anti-fascist resistance in France had been the French Communist Party. And a lot of working class people in France, who were fighting against the Nazis, had joined the Communist Party, and they were organizing unions in major industries, in the French auto industry, railroads, electrical industry, etc. And so then, coming out of World War II, with the Allied victory and France being liberated, the Communist Party in France was actually pretty popular among the working class. And it even shared responsibility in this sort of coalition government that was formed at the end of the war. And the major French labor federation was and still is the CGT, the General Confederation of Labor, the CGT. And at that time, in the mid-40s, the CGT was really led by French communists. And so the AFL, again, being very anti-communist, didn't like this. So they sent a representative to France in 1945, only a couple months after the war ended, and his name was Irving Brown. Now, later, Irving Brown would go on to become a major CIA agent, bankrolled by the CIA for many decades, and he was also, for many decades, the AFL-CIO's main representative in Europe. But at this point, 1945, he was still relatively young. He was there on behalf of the AFL, again, with very few resources, but his mission was to split the CGT, to divide it down the middle between the communists who were leading, for the most part, in leadership positions. And by the way, they came into those leadership positions democratically through, democratic, rank and file electing them. They didn't, take over, which is often the language that is used. And there was a group of non-communists within the CGT, union officials, who, they weren't in love with the communists, but they were willing to work with them in the name of labor unity and the fact that they had been elected democratically to leadership. But Irving Brown kind of came in and sort of started whispering in the ear of the non-communists, saying, why do you want to work with these awful, dirty commies? And, come along with the AFL and, join the anti-communist movement, which they called free trade unionism. This idea that, anything that's leftist is inherently unfree, and it's only freedom if you're pro-US and pro-capitalism. To make a long story short, by about 1947, Irving Brown succeeded in getting these non-communist French labor officials to pull their unions out of the CGT and create their own separate, smaller labor federation called Force Ouvrier, Workers' Force, which then, once the CIA got up and running just shortly after this, was receiving a lot of money from the CIA to kind of stay afloat and become like a rival to the CGT. So long story short, the French labor movement was divided. And then, like you said, that became kind of the playbook for the AFL and later AFL-CIO in many other countries where the Labor Federation was not even communist, but just sort of left-wing, anti-imperialist, class-conscious. The AFL and later AFL-CIO would kind of jump in partnership with the CIA and the State Department and get the sort of dissidents within those union federations to break away and form rival federations. And so then the different unions would be fighting amongst each other along these ideological Cold War battle lines instead of fighting the boss and, focusing on the well-being of the working class. It was more a lot of these Cold War intrigues going on.
I'd also like if you could give us an overview of some of what happened in Chile, because that story kind of encapsulates another important piece of the book, which is the willingness to support implicitly or explicitly really, really like dark forces that not only led to, like in France, the kind of degradation of labor unity and the distraction of people and the inability to come together, but the deaths of people. And I think it was Chile where even maybe it was somewhere else, but their support for some of these regimes even led to some of the AFL and CIO's own people being assassinated in these countries. But Chile is an interesting one because Chile is one of the South American coups that a lot of people in the United States, or more people in the United States, at least on the left, are aware of than some of the other escapades. And so tying in labor's involvement in one of these more popular or more popularly understood episodes of American meddling, I think is a worthwhile endeavor while we're talking. So how was it that the AFL intervened in Chile?
So this was in the early 1970s, kind of jumping ahead in time. In Chile, the socialist politician by the name of Salvador Allende, who's openly Marxist socialist, was a democratically elected president of the country in 1970. And the U.S. government at the time under the Nixon administration, again, was very unhappy about this because one of his goals was to nationalize a lot of the major industries in Chile, the copper industry, and like the telephone and telegraph lines that were owned by U.S. multinational corporations. So a lot of U.S. companies stood to lose a lot of profits from Allende's very popular policies, socialist policies. So the U.S. government wanted to get to work trying to undermine Allende and his government by stirring up economic turmoil and economic unrest that would then serve as, and it did serve as, justification for a military coup in 1973. Of course, September 11th, 1973, a lot of people referred to it as, the other 9/11. And the role of the AFL-CIO, because the AFL-CIO, again, top officials, not the whole labor movement, not the rank and file, or even local leaders, but just the very top officials, mostly without the knowledge of the rank and file. They had built up this close partnership with the U.S. government, the State Department, and CIA over the preceding 20 years or so, since the Cold War had started. So the AFL-CIO said, we want to do our part in stirring up economic unrest to undermine Allende and his government. And Allende, of course, was very popular with the Chilean working class because of his popular pro-worker policies, raising wages and, providing more government social services, social spending, and that kind of thing. And the main Chilean labor federation, the CUT, C-U-T, was led by leftist, socialists, communists who were pro-Allende. So the AFL-CIO had a difficult time trying to influence the trade unions in Chile and the working class in Chile. So instead, the AFL-CIO officials partnered with more like professional associations of more kind of like upper middle class small business owners and physicians, as well as people who like owned and operated their own taxi cabs and buses and trucks. So and some of the also like the engineers and supervisors in some of the copper mines. And so these professional organizations were called gremios. And this is who the AFL-CIO was partnering with, because they couldn't get a foothold in the actual unions because the unions were so pro-Allende. And there were in 1972, 73, leading up to the infamous coup, a series of strikes, especially trucker strikes that, the trucks and the highways in Chile was sort of the main way of getting food and fuel and everything else, basic necessities, distributed across the country, because it's this long, narrow country that doesn't have a lot of like railroads, but it has all these highways. And the truckers were on strike for like weeks and weeks, and it was costing the Chilean economy lots of money. The basic supplies and food and other materials were not readily available to consumers because of these trucking strikes that the AFL-CIO was helping to organize and sponsor. And it, of course, turned out after the fact, after the coup, the U.S. Senate investigated and found out that the CIA had authorized up to $8 million to support the strikers, the truckers who were on strike, to support them throughout the strike so they can continue to make a living even though they weren't working. So it was like a strike fund provided by the CIA to shut down the Chilean economy and give the military an excuse to overthrow the democratically elected socialist government. And the AFL-CIO had kind of been the middleman in this process of sort of funneling this money to the truckers and these other professional organizations, gremios. And yes, it was the outcome after the coup, of course, was horrific, with thousands and thousands of working class people, trade unionists, and others, student activists, intellectuals being jailed, tortured, murdered, disappeared, unions being banned, and, terrible economic policies. Chile was sort of ground zero for neoliberal policies of privatization and deregulation and all these things that help corporations at the expense of the working class. The AFL-CIO had helped to, I'm not saying it was the main factor or anything, but it contributed to this coup that led to this, horrible military dictatorship in Chile. And the AFL-CIO officials, again, did this in the name of anti-communism because they just didn't like Allende and his socialist policies. And so they just thought they had a right to go in and interfere, and again, working with the CIA to create this economic havoc that led to the coup and led to this horrible dictatorship.
And so the AFL did this through various international organizations that it was the parent organization for. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it was AIFLD in a lot of Central and South America. There were also similar organizations, I think, in Europe and in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And in I think it was the late 1990s or the early 2000s, you talk about how, there was something of a recognition, and you can tell me if there was ever any like formal apologies for any of this stuff, but there was at least some recognition that this was really bad. We gotta fix this. And so they consolidated all of these international organizations across the world into the Solidarity Center, which still to this day operates as the international wing of the AFL-CIO. And so the line is today, from the AFL-CIO, is that we're not doing that bad stuff anymore, right? We're doing good stuff. We're supporting workers in other countries, which is something that we should do, right? I mean, we should, the point of this book on your part is not to discourage American workers from engaging in international solidarity efforts. It's to, to reckon with what has been called that in the past and to, encourage us to do better. And so I would want something like a Solidarity Center to exist. And so talk to us about the consolidation of these organizations into the Solidarity Center and some of the work that has been done by the Solidarity Center in the last 20 years and the extent to which this really is a break with the past, or maybe not. We're still not sure, I think is the ultimate thing. But yeah, talk to us about the consolidation and the last 20 years of international work.
Yeah, and I just want to repeat what you just said about, because it's important, about the history, that all the stuff I've been talking about that the AFL-CIO was doing in other countries, all these interventions that were funded by the U.S. government. It wasn't like the AFL-CIO itself, but these, like you said, these sort of subsidiary organizations or institutes that they were often called in Latin America, the AFIELD, AIFLD, American Institute for Free Labor Development, and like you said, others in Africa and Asia. And so that's part of that's another reason why this story doesn't often get talked about or hasn't been studied as much, is because it can get so complicated with all these different layers of organizations and agencies and acronyms. And I think in some ways that was on purpose to sort of confuse people and everything. But yes, these different foreign institutes or foreign arms of the AFL-CIO in the mid-90s were consolidated into the Solidarity Center. This is partly because this is right after 1995, when new leadership came into the AFL-CIO, and the old guard of anti-communists like Lane Kirkland, who had been president of the AFL-CIO throughout the 80s and early 90s, was effectively forced out. And this sort of new generation, or they called it the New Voice slate, John Sweeney, from president of the SEIU, became president of the AFL-CIO. So these new leaders were in place, and this was now after the end of the official end of the Cold War, with, the Soviet Union had dissolved in 1991 at the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And so the new generation of labor leaders who came in to the leadership of AFL-CIO were not as obsessively anti-communist as the previous generation. And they, a lot of these terrible interventions had already started coming to light by the 80s and early 90s. So they consolidated into the Solidarity Center in 1997, all these different foreign arms. And yes, ostensibly, it is, I think, much better, because it's not driven solely by this anti-communist crusade or, that kind of thing. But the Solidarity Center, from its origin in 1997 till the present, is still almost completely financed, completely funded by the U.S. government, by the State Department, by the National Endowment for Democracy, which the NED, which is a very controversial agency that many people have argued, and I think it's very reasonable to say it's sort of just another, the NED is kind of another facet of the CIA doing these interventions overseas to try to bring governments and unions and other institutions more in a more pro-U.S. direction, and doing a lot of meddling in other countries' democracies. And this is where the Solidarity Center gets all of its funding from. It's not the money and the resources are not coming from the labor movement itself. And there have been some episodes in the early 2000s, especially like in Venezuela, when the U.S. government was trying to overthrow Hugo Chavez, who they didn't like because he was a socialist, with the Solidarity Center being implicated in an attempted coup against Hugo Chavez in 2002, or when George W. Bush invaded Iraq in 2003. Suddenly, the Solidarity Center's budget for Middle East operations increased. Took a huge increase in money coming from the U.S. government. So I think, to some extent, maybe there is still kind of a lot of very close partnership, I guess, between the AFL-CIO and the U.S. foreign policy apparatus. And you asked if there was ever any kind of formal apology about all of the interventions during the Cold War. And no, there has not been any formal apology or recognition from the AFL-CIO leadership. In 2002, there was an effort in the California Federation of Labor, the California state affiliate or state labor federation that's affiliated with the AFL-CIO, tried to or did pass a resolution that basically said the AFL-CIO should apologize, should break all ties with the CIA, should open up, all of the archival documents that it has about this and kind of come clean about all of this. And that passed in the California Federation of Labor, but then it went to, I think in the 2004 AFL-CIO convention, some committee just sort of killed that resolution and it never made it to the convention floor. So I think, and this is what I also hope the book will do, is at least spark a conversation, a discussion, a debate within the labor movement about whether we want our foreign policy or our international affairs, which, like you said, and I agree, the U.S. labor movement does need to have an international presence and be in solidarity with other labor movements around the world. But do we want that to be financially dependent on the U.S. government and all of that, what that implies? Or do we want it to be something that's much more autonomous, run by and for and funded by workers ourselves, so obviously the impact would probably be a lot smaller or more limited than what the Solidarity Center can do with millions. I mean, I'm talking tens of millions of dollars per year from the federal government to the Solidarity Center. I don't think it would be that much money if it was all just being funded directly by unions themselves, but it would be, I think, much more focused and more principled and less controversial. But it's not for me to decide. But there should be, I think, discussion and debate, because maybe some people in the labor movement are totally fine with having the AFL-CIO's foreign policy be completely financed by the State Department or the NED. But I think there should be more conversation about it, at least, because again, so much of this has been done behind the backs of the rank and file and without real democratic oversight from the membership. And I think that's what really needs to change.
Right. I will mention, I was trying to find a quote from Chris Townsend, and I saw a review that mentioned AFGE's president, Ken Blaylock. And so I will say that AFGE's only mentions in your book are positive, AFGE. And so that is my union, and I don't want you to tell me anything else so that didn't make it into the book. So,
that was for you. Yeah, that was.
Yes, that was for me. I appreciate it. And we're going to end that part of the conversation, not talk about anything. But I was looking for this quote from Chris Townsend that I thought was interesting and potentially ominous, and that is that Chris Townsend reports, and I'm sure that the person he's talking about would dispute. I don't know if you asked her if she disputes his characterization, but he says that the International Affairs Director for the AFL-CIO, Barbara Shaler, this was some time ago, I don't know if she's currently the International Affairs Director, told Chris Townsend that, quote, the State Department controls the Solidarity Center's work in the countries that have either oil resources or Islamic insurgencies, and we can have the rest. And so that's, not good. And like you said, there should be a conversation about that. And when our unions are doing international work that we think is good, we should do good international work. It should be driven by the membership, and we should have a say in it, and we should be able to have a discussion about actually what's going on. So, so I think Jeff, it was such a fascinating book. I recommend people check it out. Adam hasn't had time to read it yet, but he's a big conspiracy guy, and so I'm sure that he's looking forward to it. Adam, was there anything else that you wanted to ask Jeff before we let him go?
This was amazing. I really, really appreciated this interview. I learned a lot. I was vaguely familiar with some of this history, and mostly through reviews of your book, frankly. And I think you are doing exactly what you said in terms of starting a conversation. And we do need to have these conversations internally to the movement about what the direction of our foreign policy should be. We as a movement need to be speaking out on foreign policy, period. And we have seen some impressive work by a lot of unions speaking out for a ceasefire in Gaza, speaking out against the genocide there. I've been inspired to see that. I was mentioning before we brought you on the air that, learning some of this history, I wasn't aware of the labor connection, but learning, some of the broader history of the CIA interventions and America's bloody foreign policy abroad really is what kind of woke me up politically as a teenager and got me into politics, led me down this journey. I wouldn't have, discovered the labor movement probably had it not been for learning some of that history and in the context of the war in Iraq. And so I say all that to say how much I appreciate what you're doing and really appreciate you shedding light on this. And I think it's not surprising that there hasn't been the accountability for this in terms of, a real examination of our legacy as a movement and particular people inside of it. And I guess my question would be, for those of us who are in this movement now, and we don't want to repeat the past, we don't want to see this happen again. What are some of your thoughts there? Obviously, the funding aspect is one big piece of that, having the debate on whether we continue that. But just in a broader sense, what are your thoughts about how do we keep this sort of thing from happening, whether it's internal union democracy or other themes you want to touch on there?
Yeah, thanks. The genocide in Gaza, I think, and the response from the labor movement is a great example, I think, because when it started in October of 2023, the very first statements that came from the labor movement were coming from top union officials at the AFL-CIO, at the American Federation of Teachers, and some others that were kind of erasing the context of the conflict, if you want to call it a conflict, and just various kind of pro-U.S., totally pro-Israel, and really just sort of treating Palestinians as an afterthought, and Palestinian humanity and human rights and self-determination as sort of a non-issue. Those were some of the first statements from the labor movement. But what we saw very quickly was coming from, again, a lot of rank and filers, local leaders, staff, pushing unions to take a better stance, to actually call for a ceasefire, which early on was a controversial thing to be calling for. I mean, the White House in the months after weeks and months after October 7th didn't want anyone talking about a ceasefire. It was only because there was so much grassroots pressure, in part from the labor movement, that eventually the White House at least started paying like lip service to calling for a ceasefire. And we've also seen, again, because of a lot of grassroots rank and file action and organizing within unions, within central labor councils, several major unions have called for an arms embargo on Israel, and the AFL-CIO itself eventually was also calling for a ceasefire, at least not for an arms embargo. But this, I think this is kind of impressive when you look at the history that I lay out in the book of how traditionally unions were always kind of falling in line with U.S. foreign policy and whatever Washington was saying about some war or foreign policy crisis. And the labor movement, to a large extent, over the last year or so, has been pushing against what Washington has been doing and challenging U.S. foreign policy. So I think that's exactly like the right thing that needs to happen more often on other issues. We were talking about Cuba earlier, right? And there's for a long time been a big movement to end the embargo against Cuba. And in many other countries around the world, the U.S. is promoting kind of oppressive policies or oppressive governments, or just not caring about the will of the people in other countries and just wanting to enforce whatever's going to be good for U.S. multinational corporations. And so those are the kinds of things that it would be great if the AFL-CIO and our unions would stand against more often and speak out against. And, this mural behind me is, from the UE Hall in Chicago, and the UE, an independent union, right, United Electrical Workers, has over the last 30 years had a really amazing partnership with a Mexican union or Mexican Labor Federation called the FAT. And this mural is like a result of that, a Mexican artist coming to Chicago many years ago and painting this Hands of Solidarity mural. But what's happened has been like cross-border organizing of workers working for the same corporations like General Electric, or workers in similar industries, but in different countries and from different unions coming together and working together to, challenge the power of multinational corporations, challenge both the U.S. and Mexican governments when they're promoting policies that are anti-worker. And it's not dependent on the U.S. government. This partnership between the UE and FAT, it's completely independent, worker to worker all the way. And I think it's a great example of the kinds of labor foreign policy or labor internationalism that we can have that's much more based on actual worker solidarity. And again, the fact that the U.S. because of its military power, its economic power, really influences what happens in so many other countries and other countries' labor movements, workers all around the world, that as the labor movement here in the U.S., we kind of have a special responsibility, I think, to put more pressure and be more oppositional to U.S. foreign policy a lot of the time. If nothing else, and just for humanitarian purposes, to stop so many people being killed in wars that are either started by the U.S. or fueled by the U.S. through the provision of so many weapons and bombs.
Jeff Schurke, labor historian, journalist, union activist, and assistant professor. He is the author of a new book, Blue Collar Empire, The Untold Story of U.S. Labor's Global Anti-Communist Crusade. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope folks get some use out of it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay.
We've got one more segment that we're going to get to before we wrap up today. Adam, was there any final thoughts that you had on Schurke's interview?
I really enjoyed that. Definitely inspired me to pick up the book. And again, I just appreciate the conversation he's starting with this because it's something that I think is easy to overlook. It's easy for us to get, really focused on our problems here at home, right? Justifiably so, right? We think about what's close to us. We think about local issues, state issues, national issues. And, I find that it's often toughest to have these international conversations with people and these global conversations because it does seem so far away and so far removed. But as this interview points out, our own institutions have been involved. Right. And so that makes us involved on some level. We, in our name, things have been done. And so we have to recognize that and reckon with it. But yeah, really appreciated it and look forward to learning more and, look forward to more conversations around U.S. labor's role in a global working class context and how we can be a positive force, both through support and solidarity of other movements abroad who are maybe, dealing with less resources or tougher conditions. But also, as Jeff pointed out, putting pressure to bear on our own government, because I do agree that we have that special responsibility as workers kind of at the heart of this imperial complex. We have a special role to play. And enjoyed the conversation.
Let's go ahead and play my interview from earlier this week with Matt Bruenig. All right, folks, you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. I am joined today by Matt Bruenig, labor lawyer, former NLRB attorney, and defeater of Steven Crowder. So, Matt, welcome back to the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so if you would just remind people of kind of the case that you were brought in to against Steven Crowder, or I think it's probably more accurate to say that Steven Crowder brought a case first, and you were brought in to defend somebody. So if you would just kind of walk us through the timeline and some of the high points for the legal arguments that your the people on the other side were making and that you made in response.
Yeah. So Steven Crowder's former producer signed a severance agreement when he left that included a clause that said he could not disparage Crowder. And these are pretty common. And this agreement was a long time ago. I don't remember, but many, many, many years ago that this was signed. But it lasted into perpetuity. And Crowder had a very high-profile divorce with his now ex-wife Hillary, and this producer Jared was friends with all these people, and kind of, I guess, provided some, comforting messages to his wife during the divorce, which were produced in the lawsuit. Very basic stuff, like, I would be willing to testify to this and that, and whatever. And this really upset Crowder. So he says, hey, I've got a severance agreement with you in which you agreed not to disparage me. This email disparages me, and so I'm going to sue you. And before I got in, Jared, he had lawyers, very, very capable lawyers, but not labor lawyers. And he was prepared to just fight the case as a to defend himself and say, look, I didn't disparage Crowder. I was just giving my opinion in private to his wife. No disparagement. We're good to go. And that's fine. I think he would have been okay in that strategy, but it would have cost him a lot of money to defend himself, and you don't get that money back. And so I came in and had a slightly different strategy where I brought a unfair labor practice charge to the National Labor Relations Board. And in the charge, essentially, we argue that the non-disparagement clause, the mere existence of it, violates the National Labor Relations Act because workers have a right to disparage their employers, including their former employers, as long as they, do it concertedly and, for the purposes of mutual aid and protection. And so since this clause is illegal on its face, a lawsuit attempting to enforce it is a lawsuit that seeks an illegal objective and a lawsuit that is preempted. And so it's an illegal lawsuit. It's an unfair labor practice to even bring a lawsuit attempting to enforce a clause like this. And after we filed this and I explained this, I put it on my website, I went on the Majority Report, I went on your show. They seemed to realize that they had made a mistake and that this was not going to be a fruitful path for them. So they voluntarily dropped their non-disparagement lawsuit and decided to file a defamation lawsuit instead, thinking that that would protect them. No longer are they trying to enforce an illegal contract clause, they're just suing for defamation. The problem there, of course, that defamation is a very high bar, especially with a public figure, and Texas has an anti-SLAPP statute, which makes it so that, especially when public figures and corporations file these frivolous defamation suits, if you prevail, then they have to pay your attorney's fees. And so we file a motion to dismiss under this anti-SLAPP statute. We win. The judge orders Crowder to pay Jared $58,000. Crowder does sort of like an immediate appeal just to kind of preserve his appeal rights. And then we end up negotiating an agreement to settle all of it, to settle whatever claims he still had and to settle the claims that we had at the NLRB. And as part of that agreement, he paid my client money. We can't say how much, unfortunately. But he also agreed to rescind these non-disparagement and confidentiality clauses, not just from Jared's agreement, but from the agreements of all of his current and former employees.
There are ways that you could construct an NDA that would be legal under the NLRA as long as they do not also prohibit the kind of workers' rights to basically disparage their employers for during the course of protected activity. And so it's possible that Crowder could have created an NDA that would have prohibited the conversation that Jared was having with Crowder's wife, but he didn't. That wasn't the NDA that was there. It was an illegal NDA, one that violated the National Labor Relations Act. And so even though it's possible you could have constructed an NDA that would have prohibited this, because they didn't. They can't. Is that right?
It is possible to craft a non-disparagement confidentiality clause that is not on its face illegal. It just has to be, it can't be overbroad. So if it's written in a way that a reasonable worker would read it and think that it encompasses protected activity, then it's going to be illegal on its face. So there's essentially like two paths that you can go in a kind of, in this strategy, if you will, right? The one path is just to say this clause is illegal on its face. And so any lawsuit attempting to enforce it seeks an illegal objective. It is itself an illegal lawsuit. The second path is, regardless of what it says, it may even be lawful on its face. If you're trying to enforce it against protected activity, then that is illegal for a separate reason. Any clause, no matter how it's written, if you attempt to enforce it against protected activity, that's illegal. In this case, we only had the first strategy because what he was doing, talking to his ex-wife, that was not protected activity. But the effort to retaliate against it involved the effort to enforce an illegal clause. So yes, if they had written it a little bit better, they could have avoided this whole problem, but they didn't.
Right. Right. And so what were, when you announced this, there were obviously, as you could imagine, some people that were unhappy with you, saying that, Jared went to an Act Blue communist to fight against his former employer. And, there were just Steven Crowder fans, some of them were unhappy. What were some of the What was some of the cream of the crop legal arguments that you saw on Twitter or anywhere else that you may have seen these arguments against your winning argument in the courts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we went over it the first time you were. It's funny, after you win, all of these people who came out to say that I don't know what I'm doing, and I remember one of them was, there's no such thing as an illegal lawsuit. Like, okay, well, there's so many cases on this. Of course there is. There was that weird kind of like celebrity right-wing attorney that, I don't know, he was associated with Rittenhouse. He does kind of that stuff, I guess. And he said I don't even remember what he said, but then he started citing weird stuff in the U.S. code. Like, he didn't know what he was talking about. There was one actually very knowledgeable management side lawyer on there who said, I don't know, I think, come 2025 or 2026, your client might, be in for a rude awakening. But, we got it handled before all that. So he was not wrong about the potential risk there, but, got it dealt with before that possibility. So now there were a lot of people the first go around who were very skeptical of all this. And I mean, it's easy to be like, well, this is this internet poster guy, Matt Bruenig. He just he's full of himself. But I am a labor lawyer. I worked at the NLRB. I do actually know what I'm doing in this area. So,
right. And I'm looking at one now where you kind of go over you kind of run some libertarian types through the basics of what it means to enforce a contract. Would you go through that for our audience and explain, basically that, these contracts are not self-enforcing. It has to be the state to do it. And so what does it mean actually to say that, we don't like the state in cases like this?
Yeah, it's one of my great hobby horses that I used to be very, very interested in when I did philosophy. Is there's this kind of incoherence to what you might think of as libertarianism or laissez-faire philosophies, where they like to think we are our view is that we want to keep the government out. I just want private individuals to make agreements with private individuals and it all be private. And I just want the government out of the way. And, there's an appeal to that. I'm not saying it's totally unappealing. I wouldn't say I've had, perfectly good interactions with government either. So I get where they come from there. The problem is that all of these so-called private arrangements that you enter into, the state is always lurking in the background because they have to be the one that enforces everything, whether it's your agreements, whether it's property disputes or sales. Like the state is there setting the framework for the whole system. And this is a great illustration of this because one of the reactions, the one that I think you're referencing, is that this is terrible. They entered into an agreement, and then now the government is saying that that agreement's illegal, and they're not, I want the government out. The government shouldn't be involved in this in the first place, right? That's kind of the idea. This is against our libertarian laissez-faire principles. But what actually happened here is a great illustration of how that doesn't make sense, because what happened was, it was Steven Crowder who went to the government, who went to a court and tried to get them to punish Jared for sending emails to his wife. Like, he wants the government to get in and say, no, literally don't email my wife. So he went to the government, and then we didn't go to the government. He could have managed this any number of ways, including, and I suggested this to their lawyers over and over again, why doesn't he just blast Jared on Twitter? Crowder's so huge. If he wants to, he could just, he could use his microphone or whatever, his megaphone, just blast this guy. He didn't. He wanted the state to come in and do his bidding for him. And if that's the case, like at that point, yeah, the state surely gets to say, all right, you want us to get involved in this kind of stuff? We have rules about what we're going to get involved in. And one thing we're not going to get involved in is an employer trying to prevent its former employees from talking about them.
Right. I think that's pretty succinct, very clearly. If you're going to have the state trying to enforce contracts, the state should get to say, like, what kind of contracts it wants to enforce.
And the law was out there. It's announced. Right. You can read it. I mean, it's not easy, but you could have hired, if you'd hired me to write the agreement, you probably would have had a better go of it. So
Right. Well, and so so you were able to win. You're not able to disclose the settlement amount, but you did. Part of the settlement was, I guess you didn't technically win. You settled, but I think that kind of counts as a win, because obviously what Crowder would have wanted is not to settle and not to pay Jared Monroe a bunch of money.
Right. He sued us wanting money, and he ended up paying us money. So
right. So I think even though it's not like the court didn't say, you won, I think pretty clearly that counts as a win.
Well, the district court did say we won, right? We won that one. It's just then it was appealed. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the thing is that, guess what? Every court case ends in a settlement, pretty much. I mean, unless someone just decides to stop appealing. Like a good example of this was the Johnny Depp one. That was really, everyone say Depp won. That actually ended in a settlement agreement too, because it was appealed, and then they ended up, it always ends in a settlement. So
right. Well, and so, but the thing that one of the things that you were able to win in the settlement was the ability to do this, right? You won the ability to talk about everything that has been public so far. How were you able to get them to agree to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple, actually. So if you want to withdraw charges at the NLRB as part of a non-board settlement agreement, which this is, they have rules that govern what that agreement can say. And one of those rules is that the agreement cannot have any confidentiality rules except for the financial terms of the agreement. So they actually did come forward first with the initial drafts, and they wanted confidentiality over the whole thing. I then explained to them, oh no, if you want us to withdraw the board charges, the board's not going to let us do that unless you only confine it to the dollar term. So that's another way in which the board is coming in and achieving something that normally you don't achieve, because I'm sure you've probably read many news reports about lawsuits, and everything's always confidential. That's just like a default term in these agreements. But the board's position is that we're not going to allow that except for the dollar amount. And the board is the one that decides whether your charges can be withdrawn. You can request it. You can send in a form saying, I want you to withdraw it. But once you've filed it, it's up to them. It's their case. They can decide whether to withdraw it or not.
Interesting. And so all of this that you're kind of laying out really illustrates
the value of having an actual labor lawyer when you're discussing labor law and when you're trying to make moves within labor law. And I can't remember where it was that you said this, but I remember on a podcast or somewhere you said that when you got fired from the NLRB or let go or you resigned or whatever it was, there was some controversy around that. And I don't know, maybe we can get you on to talk about that sometime because I think it's a pretty funny story. But you said that you immediately got management side headhunters calling you, offering you double your salary to come do labor law for the bad guys. And so, it's just worth saying that like the knowledge that you have is very valuable, and every single NLRB attorney or union side lawyer has basically that kind of opportunity that they don't take. And so it's, just worth putting some laurels on you, I guess.
Yeah, no, you compare the management side pay to the union side pay and I know union side lawyers who are making 100K, which look, that's good money, right? And normal workers, that's good money. You go over to the management side, the people they're going to get up against day to day, they're making triple that. And they're not better lawyers. So there's a level of just choosing to not, take the money.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, a lot of union members make $100,000. I was very nearly six figures in my last job, and I know that there were staff for the union that I was a part of that didn't make as much money as I did. So union members, we do all right for ourselves too. So it's not unreasonable that our lawyers are paid as much as we are. So. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that, but I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about your new project. You're always making new projects. This one is NLRB research, and that's really exciting for me because it seems like it'll be a really cool tool that stewards and non-lawyers can use to make use of the law. So talk to us about NLRB research, why you did it, and some of what it does.
Yeah, I actually started this before NLRB Edge, NLRBEdge.com, which is my sort of like daily update on NLRB stuff. The NLRB Edge grew out of this, but about a year ago, I don't know what, I just kind of hit me that, I bet I could write some code that would download all the documents from the NLRB website, get them all neatly organized, make them all text searchable, like make a really good tool. I used to be a programmer. I could probably do this, and the NLRB website right now is so unusable for research purposes. And so I just kind of did it, and I spent like a month or so just really pounding away, relearning a lot of programming, and it worked. And so I was able to produce this database that now has, I think, like 91,000 documents in it. And once a day, it just puts any new documents that are put on the NLRB website of a certain kind, that are legally relevant. It puts it in the database, and so it's always up to date. And it's text searchable, nice, pretty intuitive search box, and it allows you to do legal research. And I use it exclusively for my legal research. Everything I did in the Crowder case, I used NLRBresearch.com. NLRB Edge came out of that because I realized once I had it created that I also now have a list every day of everything that the NLRB puts out. And so I can use that list, get the summaries, and put it on there. And that would be useful for people who want to keep tabs on the agency. And we've got 11,000 subscribers at NLRB Edge, mostly free subscribers, but some pay. So it's been a really useful tool. One of the cool things about it, all the documents have AI summaries. So, you can do a search and then you can click the AI summary and you can, just read that instead of having to read the legal text, which, sometimes can be pretty long and maybe intimidating. But yeah, any union steward who, is confronted with a problem that they don't know the answer to, if they spend a little bit of time, putting words or phrases into the search box, they might find a case with the answer. And I've had a lot of feedback from stewards saying that it's been really useful for that kind of thing.
That's really exciting. So hope folks will take advantage of that. Do you have in your on your docket to do a similar thing for the FLRA?
A lot of people, you would be surprised how many emails, and not FLRA, RLA, all the state boards. Everyone wants me to do all this stuff, and I'm not against it. The novelty is that the NLRB website was so, I was going to say exploitable, but it makes it sound like I've done a bad thing. It was so susceptible to this kind of web crawling that I could write like a little Google-like web crawler just focused on the NLRB website, and it had like all the little metadata. Like it's set up reasonably well. It's just not searchable or functional on the NLRB website, and you have to go to like 13 different pages to go through the different kinds of documents. Some of them aren't searchable, et cetera, et cetera. So their website was really set up very, very well for that. But some of them like I could do it for all the Supreme Court decisions, for example, or all of the even circuit court decisions. Like I've looked at other applications of it, but yeah, I don't know if the FLRA, I think I looked at that and I decided the website was not really susceptible to it, but maybe I'll take another stab at it.
That's frustrating because as a federal employee, I'm a member of AFGE, so when I was doing grievances, it was always very difficult to kind of find like, oh, what's the precedence, or like where have cases like this been decided before, and it's just not, I don't know. It makes sense that there's not as many resources out there for federal employees in federal labor law because there's not as many people working under federal labor law as there is the NLRA, right? But it did seem like there was a serious absence of resources for navigating federal labor law for federal employee union stewards.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, when I was at the NLRB, we had a union, you could imagine, and we were governed by the FLRA, and we had to hire outside lawyers to help us with our issues, though it's a
union of lawyers had to hire some different lawyers.
A union of labor lawyers who work in the labor enforcing agency was like, yeah, FLRA, I don't know. So.
Wow. Because it's a different law. Because like what you are, the labor law that you enforced as the NLRB attorneys was not the same labor law that you worked under, and so you had to get somebody who specialized in a different set of laws. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It might be worth maybe you could reach out to AFGE and see if they'd pay you to do it.
Yeah, it would be in a way like a more direct. Like there's a smaller group of possible client. You really could just hit one or two unions and be like, come on. Whereas this one is a little bit harder to be like called up the Teamsters and be like, I got this website.
Yeah. AFGE is definitely it really is. There's like one or two there. AFGE, IFPTE, and NIFI is the only ones with any real kind of presence in the federal sector other than, I guess, NLRBU. Which we've had NLRBU Local 10 president on the show before to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so big fans of the NLRB union. All right. Well, Matt Bruenig, really appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate all of your work, everything that you do for folks, the new project or the, I guess, old project in NLRB research, and looking forward to you following through on your commitment to create a similar tool for federal labor law.
I'll check it out. All right. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, man. Bye. All right, folks. That brings us about to the end of the program. I know Adam had a couple of plugs that he wanted to make sure to give y'all right here at the end. So, Adam, what are you tracking for the next week or two?
Yeah, I wanted to remind folks to go to labornotes.org/events. They do have some really cool calls scheduled for the next couple weeks that I'm really interested in. I'm going to try to attend as many as I can. Coming up on January 27th at 6:30 p.m. Central, Labor Notes has a national call. It's Beating the Billionaires in 2025. So that sounds good. I like that Labor Notes is having these national calls to kind of get progressive labor activists together, even virtually, and have these conversations and get some analysis, get some resources, ideas, and inspiration. So again, that's January 27th at 6:30 p.m. Central, Labor Notes National Call, Beating the Billionaires in 2025. A couple days later, on January 29th at 6 p.m. Central, they are holding their Stewards Workshop, and this one will be holding effective meetings. That is very practical and very timely. That's always timely because we've all been to ineffective meetings. And something that I think we all encounter in the course of organizing is that people are really busy. People have a lot on their plate. They're, raising kids. They're taking care of sick loved ones. They're working probably too much. They may work a second or third job, have a side hustle, etc., etc. People are really busy. They have a lot on their calendar. And so if you're going to convince them to come to a meeting, it better be good, right? And that puts pressure on us as organizers to make our meetings effective. And if you're in a union, it's a role and responsibility you have as an active, engaged member to help make your meetings better and more productive and more effective. Because I don't know about y'all, but I've been to some union meetings that were kind of a waste of time. And, that's a big old bummer, right? Because for a lot of people, the meeting, once a month or however often you meet, is kind of the big avenue for communication and engagement with the union. That's really where people kind of engage with the union, is at the regular meeting. And so, again, we need to make sure it's good. So January 29th, 6 p.m. Central, Labor Notes Stewards Workshop, holding effective meetings. And then on January 30th at 6:30 p.m. Central, they are going to do another one of their Secrets of a Successful Organizer training. Really am a big fan of that. I believe in that training that they offer. I believe in the book, Secrets of a Successful Organizer. If you've never been through it, you should pick it up. Pick up the book. You should go through the training series online. It's really worth it. If you're interested in new organizing, if you're a worker at a non-union facility, this is a must for you. If you are in a unionized shop already, but you want to have a stronger, more militant union, a better union that can fight and win, again, this is helpful for you. And if you're not even in a union environment and you're just listening because you're into this for whatever reason, it's still helpful to know how to organize, right? And build power and actually connect with people and get people to do stuff that will make a positive impact in society. So again, that's January 30th, 6:30 p.m. Central, Secrets of a Successful Organizer. And then the last call that I saw from Labor Notes, February 3rd, and that is at 7 p.m. Central, is Steering Green Transitions. So that's going to be a good conversation about, energy transition, green energy, and how we can make sure those are good union jobs, how we can bring unions to that industry, how we can hold on to unions where we have them in that industry, all of that kind of thing. So a good conversation. The labor movement absolutely needs to be involved in these conversations around the green energy transition. And I think in light of, crisis after crisis after crisis of natural disasters that we're facing, it's more important than ever that labor be engaged in conversations around the climate and what we can do to protect our climate, to improve it, to mitigate natural disasters, to deal with disasters when they do happen. Those are all really important, and we didn't mention much about it this week, but definitely our hearts go out to everybody impacted by the wildfires in California. We know a lot of union members have been impacted. A lot of unions are doing mutual aid and disaster relief, providing resources, staffing, money, whatever they can to members and impacted communities and their families out there. So shout out to all the unions who are doing that. That's something we don't talk about a lot, but unions don't just do mutual aid in the form of strike funds. A lot of unions have natural disaster relief funds. A lot of unions are active when this kind of thing happens. They take action to provide relief, both to their members who are impacted, but also, the broader community. That's the power that we have when working people come together and organize collectively and bring our talents and our resources together and work together to really make things better for folks. And for you Alabama folks, I did mention February 3rd is the Labor Notes Green Transitions Call, but February 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, is the Monday before the legislative session starts. So Alabama Arise will hold a statewide legislative action briefing that evening on Zoom. Definitely, if you live in Alabama, you're encouraged to attend that so you know what's going to be coming down the pike in Montgomery, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how you can make a difference there. And just on the Valley Labor Report, make sure you are liked and subscribed to all of our stuff online. We put out Boss Watch and Last Week in Southern Labor as a newsletter every week. You can get that in your inbox. It covers a lot of ground that we don't have time for in the show. Because I can tell you, like this week, Boss Watch, there were so many stories of criminal activities by bosses. We barely touched the surface of it. And so there's a lot of good information. It's a good resource. Definitely encourage you to check that out. Just continue to support the program, and we really appreciate all the support we've received, whether you contribute financially or you just tune in when you can. If you've told people about the program, if you've shared our stuff on social media, it all makes a difference. We appreciate it. We're a grassroots operation. We do this for the love of the game because we really do believe the labor movement is critical to the success of working class people here in America and across the world. And so we can't do this project without you. Appreciate your support.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.